Morning, everyone. Welcome to the Tuesday public meeting of the BOCC. We'll start with the flag salute. If you rise. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I would ask Commissioner Mortensen to review the minutes for us, please.
Good morning, everyone. As usual, I reviewed the minutes of the activities last week and I move to approve those minutes.
Any questions on the minutes?
I'm satisfied with them too.
Okay. I would call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Also vote aye. Passes. I'm just. Okay. Go through the consent agenda. We do have Board of Health scheduled at 10 o'clock today. As we get through business of the public meeting, if that wraps up before 10, we'll certainly open for public comments if we have that time. If this meeting runs, then we'll have to get through Board of Health and then open it up, but we will do our best to make sure we get all public comments. Consent agenda, we have a call for hearing coming up October 17th at 9:30 a.m. This is updates to the building code ordinance. Those that comes down to us from the state of Washington, and our Department of Building and Planning will be going over what those changes are. So that hearing will be once again October 17th at 9:30 in this building.
So Mr. Chairman, yesterday we heard a report from our building official that the state building code council has postponed the effectiveness of the restrictions that are added until next spring, I think.
March date, I think the clerk of the board has the date.
So
Tracy's on.
there she is.
I
You
am
wanna
on.
clarify
Good morning,
that?
gentlemen.
Uh-huh.
The effective date is now March 15th, and so I would request that we set the board adoption or to have it placed on a hearing for March 5th. If that works for the board.
Okay, so the October 17th will change to March 5th of next year?
That is correct.
Okay.
2024.
Okay,
And Tracy, I know we mentioned it yesterday, but these are the changes the state is making that basically prohibits the purchase of natural gas utilities for homes.
Correct.
Okay. And it's one
Yeah.
of those things we're bound to have. We have the hearing and then we have to pass the state
yeah,
guidelines.
this is, and you've heard me talk about it. This is one of my favorites. You got a
Yeah.
group that decides building codes for the whole state of Washington, no matter how your county sets up. And as our staff puts it, we don't have to adopt it, but we have to enforce it. So anyway, so now you have much advance notice.
Yeah.
Thanks, Tracy. Couple agreements. We have Midway Underground LLC on the Cathlamet Road Slide Repair Project. We talked about that a couple times in previous meetings. Two more agreements with that our Public Works does when they need appraisal services for the work they do with Epic Land Solutions. And then we have a couple letters, a letter to Joe Belcher, congratulating him on his retirement, over 35 years of service to the county. Letter from Federal Energy Regulation Commission regarding Penstock inspection report, which is due December 31st, 2024 on the SWIFT #2 hydroelectric project. And then a monthly update, August 2023 from Scott Bailey on, it's a regional economist, Washington Employment Security Department regarding Southwest Washington labor markets. And then we have vouchers in the amount of $3,971,496 54. So any other questions on the consent agenda? How do we want to handle? How do you want to handle the first one? Since we won't have a hearing till March.
Right, the motion will be made that the change in the consent agenda will show the March date.
Okay,
So I move that we amend the consent agenda item number 1 to change the date from October 17th to March
5,
March 5th. Thank you.
2024. Yeah.
And that's just to amend the.
Yeah.
And then the chair.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we have a motion to amend the public hearing. Any questions, concerns on that? I see none. I call for the vote. Those in favor
Aye.
Aye.
also vote aye. Okay, then I would entertain a motion on the amended consent agenda.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the consent agenda as presented by staff with the addition or the amendment to item number 1.
Okay, we have a motion. Any comments on the consent agenda? Not seeing any. I would call for a vote. Those in favor
Aye.
Aye.
also vote aye. Thank you. Okay, we'll get into motion items. Looks like Public Works. We have one.
Good morning, Commissioners. Will Tosted, Facilities Maintenance. We're working with Public Works on redoing the parking lots at the Hall of Justice building. We went out and got 3 bids for the replacement, with the lowest bid going to Lakeside Industries for $486,542.94. With the highest bid going up to $993,000.
Now-
Anybody that's been to the Hall of Justice knows that the parking lots need replaced for several years. There's potholes, it's alligatored, so we're finally getting around to do this, and I think it's going to be a great project.
My understanding is the bid also includes paving at the Health and Human Services building.
Correct. Yes, this is for the Hall of Justice South lot, extending to we know it as the old Charlie's building. It's a yellow building there. The east lot, which is right along the river, and Health and Human Services front and back.
And just to be sure I understood, that includes all of those lots.
Correct. Yep. That bid includes all 3.
Then is there a timeline?
No timeline yet. Once the contract's approved and executed, we will work with Lakeside Industries and hopefully get on their schedule sooner than later, as soon as possible, and try to get this done while the weather is still fairly dry.
So I noticed staff has been working on the trees that are along 3rd Avenue that have gotten kind of overgrown, and they've trimmed those down.
Yeah,
But they've also removed the trees in the south parking lot.
correct.
Are there plans to replace the trees, or is that going to be just landscaped?
No plans yet to replace those. We did a arborist inventory as part of this, kind of aesthetic beautification, trying to make everything look better. And those trees were at the end of life. The arborist said they recommended removal, and that's what we did.
So for clarification, when you say there are no plans, does that mean that the plan is not to put trees in there?
I don't know yet. No plans that I know of for replacements.
So it's still left open.
No decision has been made.
Correct.
Thank you.
To coin a phrase we use often.
The question?
Okay. Any questions?
Since you're talking about removing trees along 3rd Avenue,
Those trees were just trimmed up. The 3rd Avenue ones were.
If you looked at the root systems, like the hornbeam trees the city of Longview planted on Commerce that destroyed your storm drains. I believe you were on the council at that time. Whoever picked those trees, it cost a fortune for Longview to take those trees out. The county should consider taking those trees along Third Avenue on the south lot of the Hall of Justice out too, to avoid further problems. Or you're going to be coming back here and expending in excess of another $200,000. Speaking of, as a graduate of the School of Forestry at Oregon State University, I'd highly recommend it. And in the same time, at the intersection, I believe it's Washington and Third that borders the fairgrounds. Continue on taking out those fir trees, which have caused a pain in the south end of any government official ever since the fairgrounds was built. Take those out too. Because you've already taken some of them out next to the old county road department area. Take the rest of them out while you're there, so you don't have to come back and do another contract and another bid.
Any other comments on the paving project? Pleasure of
Mr.
the board.
Chairman, I move that we approve the bid award and contract execution with Lakeside Industries for the replacement of parking lot asphalt as has been described by staff.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor. Last call for comments. See none, I would call for the vote. Those in favor
Aye.
Aye.
also vote aye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ian. Health and Human Services, Gina.
Hey, good morning. Gina James, Health and Human Services. The item we have on the agenda today is we have 3 items. The first is a grant agreement with the Washington State Department of Commerce. This is a 2-year grant from Commerce. We also have on the agenda 2 pass-through contracts, one with Lower Columbia CAP and one with
Community.
the Community Mediation Center. This grant is a combination of state funds and local document recording fees that when we collect those local document recording fees locally, the ones that are designated for housing and homeless services, the county gets to retain a portion and another portion goes up to the state. Part of what's in this contract is some of those document recording fees coming back to us in the form of this grant. One of the new pieces this year was the eviction prevention funding that's included in this grant. A couple years back, the state legislature passed an additional $100 document recording fee designated for housing and homelessness. The legislature decided that fee was to go towards eviction prevention. So we're now seeing some of that funding come back. So that's included in this grant as well. With this particular grant, the state gives counties the first right of refusal. If counties choose not to engage with this grant, then the state will issue an RFP in our community and find a local provider that they will contract with. When we discussed this grant application back in the spring with the board approved submitting the application. So we're now seeing the contract. Our application was approved and now we have the contract. We did issue an RFP late spring of last year. We had 4 respondents to that RFP and 2 of them we have contracts with in front of you today. You'll notice if you do the math, there's still some funding that's unallocated and I'd still like to continue exploring some additional partnerships there. We also use some of this funding to pay for our staff time that goes towards things like the point in time count, staffing the homeless housing task force, work on our local plan, we can bill some of those activities towards this grant instead of our local document recording fees. So we do that with this funding as well. As I mentioned, this is a 2-year contract. The pass-through grants are also 2-year contracts. The total contract, amount is $6.3 million for that 2-year period. There is a couple of additional funding streams that were included this year that we haven't seen before. One is the eviction prevention funding that I had mentioned. There was also a, they call it a local document recording fee support. So the state has allocated some additional funding that can be used for anything we would use our local document recording fees for. So it's not tied to some of the rest of the state guidelines, but we can use it for just like we use our local document recording fees. So that is included as well. There's a couple other pieces that I'll continue to talk to the board about. We're allocating today is primarily the HEN funding, the housing and essential needs. Some of the what they call CHG standard or base, which is kind of a flex funding. And then there's a small amount of designated funding called HEN Bridge. And it's intended to for a short-term support when people are in the HEN program and they are found not eligible, just to be able to have a little bit of time to transfer them to a different longer-term program. So there's a little bit of that funding in here as well. And I will pause there and see what kind of questions there are.
Do you have an idea on the dock fees that you have a little bit of flexibility on and a dollar amount on that, or is that?
Yes, so they allocated a little over 128,000 per year. So about 260,000 for the 2-year period.
And we have some flexibility with that?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, which is nice. So I would like to include this portion if we have an RFP that we're doing. I know we've been talking about some different affordable housing options. We can include this portion in that, for example. So
Yeah.
gives us a little bit.
Yeah. And I would just reiterate what Gina said. They brought this to us in the spring, March, or in that area. And these are funds that come down and we can choose not to do these contracts. The county doesn't have to do these contracts, but then the state just does them. We'll put an RFP and do them direct.
Mhm.
And I don't want to misspeak for the whole board, but I think we're pretty much in line, and at least we want to see these and give the public an opportunity, whether you agree with it or you don't agree with it, to know what's going on and to comment on it and to just have your voice heard. So we agreed to have those contracts come to us. If I misspoke anything there, please correct me, but I think that's where we were at.
So each year that we talk about the HEN program, it's, I think it's always useful to put it within context. Years and years ago, very low income people were actually given money by the state to exist on, and walking around money is sometimes called. And that eventually proved to be not very effective in actually providing the basic needs, because people would tend to spend the money on things that they want in the moment and not necessarily the appropriate thing. So the state, probably about 15 or 20 years ago, developed what is called HEN, which actually is an acronym that means housing and essential needs.
Mhm.
And so rather than getting the money, they get vouchers and products actually. So they don't have the discretion to use the support from the state for whatever they want. They get housing vouchers and they get products, personal products, those essential needs.
Mhm.
And I mean, it is interesting because the qualifications for being in the HEN program, have changed as inflation has gone up. But typically, we contract with CAP to be the administrator of this particular program. The new part that you mentioned, the housing or the eviction prevention program, is a little bit frustrating because we'd been through that through COVID, and there were all kinds of pushback from landlords who were having a very difficult time collecting rents. And because people said, well, I don't have to pay, so I'm not going to pay. And I thought we'd kind of said, at least it's coming to an end. And but the state kind of preempted that whole thing, and it's going to continue for a while.
It's on a much smaller scale. And one of the things that I know we've heard from the Community Mediation Center a couple of times, and their effort is to try to continue doing some of that voluntary mediation work between landlords and tenants to help resolve whatever issue is going on there, to help prevent an eviction. One of the things we've looked at is only using the eviction prevention. Well, the eviction prevention funds is what is in the Community Mediation Center contract. So we can fund some of those activities with these funds. And then potentially for rent assistance piece of it, prioritizing that for individuals who are engaged in that mediation process, and having that be a direct referral for that particular assistance.
So the Community Mediation Service is a relatively new program. We had a kind of a pilot program the last 6 months or so. And it's been kind of exciting to hear the impact that has had. We've heard back from both tenants and landlords that this is a way to resolve a lot of the conflicts. So I'm glad we were able to provide some additional funding to keep that service in line.
Question, how much is it? I'd like to go to the eviction prevention again. How much is in that pot?
The eviction prevention funding that is, I have to do math. About 2 million for the 2-year period. For the whole 2 years.
And that compares with, I think we had about 6 million before during COVID for eviction prevention, right? But
The
that
largest,
was over several years.
yeah, the largest, we saw a couple different programs. The largest one was about 9.4 million.
Yeah.
So out of that pot of money, what things can be, for what things can it be used? I think you mentioned the mediation center.
Right, that falls under the state, calls that operations. So that's what is going towards the mediation center, is a portion of the operations funds and a small amount of admin. It's 10 or 15% admin. And then the only other thing it can be used for is rent. So rent assistance. So we have a small amount of that rent assistance in the contract with CAP. And what we've talked to both about is working together to have a referral process for working with the individuals who are going through the mediation process.
Is that the contract we will see in the next item that you're
Correct.
addressing? And is the rule still that we have to go through CAP for administering rent assistance?
No. We did do an RFP and we got 4 responses to that RFP. CAP and the Community Mediation Center were 2 of those. There were 2 other responses, one from Community House and one from Kai Rivers Recovery Cafe. Those were much smaller requests. So I'm still kind of talking with them about what it could look like, and would bring that back to the board.
And what I think we saw maybe yesterday, we're considering 127,000 or so for the mediation center.
Let me double check.
Yeah, 127,840.
Correct, yes.
And that's
the one after the cap motion.
the one after the cap portion. Okay. And that's for, well, we'll talk about it at that time then. So we'll be working through this for a while, trying to figure out how best to use the money.
Yes, yes, there is some history, as Commissioner Weber had mentioned. And there's also some new funding in it this year that we haven't seen before. So what we're allocating today is
Yeah.
primarily the historic funding plus some of the eviction prevention. There is a portion of the eviction prevention that's not allocated that we can still kind of work through and figure that piece out, as well as the other local document recording fee support that I had mentioned. That's in there as well.
Okay, one of the reasons I dwell on this a little bit is I think this is one of those somewhat counterproductive efforts in terms of just rental assistance. Even though the money doesn't go to the tenant, goes to the landlord, it still doesn't give the landlord any incentive at all to drop the rates. And so it really works against us, but I just want to be sure we're aware of that, and we'll discuss that in the future more. And then the total amount of 6 million or so, how was that amount determined?
That would be a good question for the state. They send us the funding in a couple of different categories. And some of it is determined on a formula basis. The HIN portion, for example, they look at our population, the number of individuals in poverty, that type of thing, and have a formula basis for the allocation. The eviction prevention funding, as I mentioned, is part of that document recording fee that's collected, and we send to the state and they're returning it back. Again, I think it's a formula, some type of basis, depending on how much was collected, and then they divvy it up between the counties.
And the formula is not a strict per capita formula.
I don't believe so. I will check on that though.
Okay, well, it's always interesting that we pay the state and the state then decides how it's going to allocate.
Minus their cut, you know. We never get 100% back of what our people pay.
Yeah, in some cases, to me, that is a totally accurate but double-edged sword too, because I suspect we don't pay as much in taxes as we get back in terms of doc recording fees, but I don't know. I mean, that the devil's in the detail there.
Well,
It's on.
not current taxes anyway,
Yeah.
but it's a debt that gets
Yeah.
paid sometime.
And people don't like to realize that if we subsidize something like a rent, that's equivalent to asking somebody somewhere else to pay for our rent. And that reminds me, this would include utilities also?
Yes. Not, it's a little bit different, I believe, than what we saw with the
Okay.
previous programs.
Gina, I did have a question. It seems to me several years ago when we began collecting the document recording fees, I think the cities had agreed to pool document recording fees so that we had a single approach in addressing homelessness. In the last year or so, I seem to remember the city of Longview saying they're taking theirs back. Are they getting access to these same kind of programs with the money that's refunded to the city, or do they not qualify for that?
No, I don't believe so. I think this is,
I'm
comes to
sorry, you
counties.
don't believe so what? I'm sorry, I lost the context.
I don't believe that the city gets an allocation similar to this from the state where they're saying, you know, hey, here's this much set aside for your city. Do you want to engage with this or not? I don't think that that happens. Not that I'm aware of. I think this consolidated homeless grant is primarily,
It's a
offered
different
to
set of
counties.
$100 documented fees.
That's the question, yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
yeah, that is.
So
an
we'll be getting
interesting
less in document recording fees just because they're taking out a substantial amount of that local
Correct,
share.
correct.
Plus the
It is
market,
a bit confusing.
plus the market. Just a little bit.
And the market.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, although I tend to be a little pickish. When you say substantial, it's certainly, maybe you could take a moment and describe how the normal document recording fees are allocated, are assigned to the government entities.
Oh, sure. So the document recording fees, there are several document recording fees, but there are some of them are designated for housing and homeless services. So when they're collected here locally, in statute is a split for how much the counties retain and how much the counties have to send back up to send up to the state. It actually just changed in July. It used to be 3 separate statutes, 3 separate document recording fees, actually a 4th if you count the $100 fee. And the legislature combined it into one statute. So it's now outlined in one statute instead of 3 or 4. The document recording fees designated for housing and homeless services, I think it's $183 plus the 100. So it's basically split now and a percentage. So there's 15% that we keep that we can only use for certain things. There's another 75% that we keep that we can use for things that are on our local 5-year plan. So it's all split out in the one RCW now.
So I was looking also for the general allocation within the pool. That is to say, if all doc recording fees came from events that were only in the county and none in Longview, Longview would get no
Oh,
funding. They opted to take their funding, which as my colleague mentioned was pooled. They said we want it ourselves. And that's what I was kind of addressing.
oh, my
And
apologies.
so is it correct that it's transactions in the respective political entity that
It's
accrues?
based off of the real estate excise tax amount. I'm not an expert in all of that, but I know that the portion that they're able to claim from us is equal to the amount of real estate excise tax that's collected.
In their region.
I assume so. Yes.
That was my understanding, was that, yeah.
Thank you. Gina, I was wondering, is there a specific outline of all the contractors that you're using and how successful that program has been with all the millions? I'm just still seeing lots of homeless people. Just a question.
You're talking about for this program in particular or the previous?
This particular program.
Yeah. So we primarily have worked with Lower Columbia CAP historically. This year, there's some additional funding streams. So we are starting to work with some different partners. Most of this funding is for housing and essential needs, rapid rehousing, that assists individuals who've been found temporarily unable to work for a period of 90 days or more. If they're eligible through the state and they complete their monthly case management with the state and all of those things, they can keep their eligibility and be eligible for a housing voucher through this program. So last contract cycle, there were about 490 individuals in the program served. And there's still some in the program. We saw that it took individuals about 78 days to get housed. So once they entered the program, on average, it took 78 days to get people housed. And of the individuals that have exited, we're about a 60% they've exited to a permanent destination, which would be like they're renting it on their own. They've found another permanent place to live. So
Just one comment there. They may be renting it on their own. That doesn't mean that they're paying the full fare on their own, right?
correct.
Okay.
Correct. It could mean that they are became eligible for a voucher through housing opportunities, for example, and that's part of it. But
Could I ask one more question? And on those essential vouchers, is it real clear that they can't use it for unessential things? Is there a way to monitor that?
so the rent piece goes directly to the landlord. So it's not exchanged through the tenant. There's the essential needs piece that Commissioner Weber mentioned. It's actually, CAP used to keep a stockpile of all these essential need items. And I think it got a little chaotic having the stockpile of things, laundry detergent and things like that, shampoo. What they have been doing recently is issuing a card for the dollar store. It's one of the few places that doesn't sell alcohol and tobacco and those types of things. And
Okay,
so
good.
that's one of the reasons why that's where it is.
And I'm sorry, I have one more question. What is the infection prevention program? They added funds. You said something about infection prevention dollars.
Oh, eviction prevention.
Oh, eviction. Oh,
Yes.
my hearing is a problem.
That's
Okay.
okay.
Dealing with recording fees, as you recall, I went through this with you back last spring when I found out the exorbitant amount just to file one document. I believe it was $400 for like a deed, according to what's on the auditor's reader board. Now, I just contributed to this fund Friday. I needed 7 pages from the assessor. She charged me $1 a page, and I assume it went to this document recording fees. Now I hear there's it's almost like a split, like the mob is skimming like they did in Las Vegas. Now, can't you people skim from the state? Or will that cause Mr. Ferguson to come down here again? Question.
I'm not sure I understood the context.
Well, listening to this split over here, and we're not sure, at least in my mind, where the money goes according to the RCW. And you mentioned that Longview took theirs. And from what I heard, they can't do that now from the same pool. Is that correct?
I'm a little bit confused, Steve. You said you only were charged $7?
A page. I had 7 pages.
Yeah, so.
I thought
$7.
technology was supposed to reduce that, like it used to be 5 cents.
So
when I-
Jeannie, you said that the document recording fees are about 300 or almost $400.
400.
I think we might be talking about two different
Different things,
things.
okay.
Yeah, it
No,
is
we're
for the document recording fees, it is in statute how much we keep, how much the state gets to keep. And so we have to follow that.
Well, that was like what the mob did when they still had coin in Vegas. They skimmed off the top. Now we've legalized it, according to what I heard today.
No, I think specifically here, I am in support of what Longview did. That said, whatever is collected in our district, we want it. And that seems fair enough. And the only skimming that occurs is the management fee that our chairman is so fond of.
Now, I want to make this clear on the record. The only skimming that occurs is in management. Now, that scares me right there.
That actually is typically constrained. I think Jana will say that there's a cap of 15% is,
They're a little bit different, 7 to 15%, depending on the funding source.
Okay, last question. Where do I go to get my cut? Al sent me from the south side.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
I said, where do I go to get my cut? Al sent me from the south side. Cicero.
You have to be on the list.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, I have to be on the list. Oh,
Are you incorporated and all that kind of
I,
stuff
I am, as a matter of
as a
fact,
municipality?
as a municipal wildland firefighter. I am the Stella Wildland Firefighting Department. So I qualify, right?
One thing I should say, the document recording fees are onerous. Our auditor is trying to figure out how not all documents are the same. So we talk about the sale of a house and $300 may not quash the deal, but you don't want your marriage certificate for you already to start out with $303 in the hole or something like that. So she's trying to figure out ways there we can help the public. And I
That's
don't
called-
know where that stands now.
It's with AI now. Now, I heard another acronym, RFP. Was that correct?
You
What's
did hear
stand
that.
for?
Re-
What-
Request for proposal.
Can I submit one?
Sure. If we have, you check the county bid page when we post ones and we'll take any responses.
Cool.
Accountability, responsibility, reporting, and unintended consequences. Is that, first of all, we are sponsoring at least a $6.3 million business in our community. That's what this really is, an umbrella over it, and we have a lot of services attached to it. Normally, there is very close, or at least in private enterprise, close accounting and responsibility for those. What kind of a report does CAP give us for their $3.7 million?
So we look at a couple different things throughout the contract period. We have a homeless management information system where CAP is entering data in as people.
Really results oriented, not all of the input, but what is the benefit to the community in actual saving or something that they do for that?
Sure. So one of the things the homeless management information system does for us is it lets us look at that data at the end. So that's where, when I mentioned earlier, the amount of time it took someone to get into housing and the percents to permanent destinations, we're able to pull that data at any time to look at that. A lot of who stays in this program is dependent on the state's eligibility and keeping up with that. And that's the state's responsibility. So when the state says this person's no longer eligible, then they're not in the program anymore. So that's one thing that gets factored in as well. We're sort of this one piece to this overall program that's doing just the housing part of it. So we look at those things. The state looks at it. We also monitor each year the providers. So we go in and do an extensive review of the financials, the case notes, the client files, all of those.
And who is we?
pieces.
Is it your staff?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, so unintended consequences.
If I might, to try to chime in on that, before you go on to that, trying to get accountability has been very difficult. I was always particularly interested in fair play, and fair play in this case is defined as, how much the state or how much you pay me and Dennis and Rick and all the employees. I cannot find, I am denied access to understanding who collects these funds. So it's almost impossible to do any auditing. So if somebody says, well, I spent so many dollars on Mr. X, I cannot find Mr. X and say, Mr. X, did that air conditioner we paid for, did you get it? We can't follow at that level of detail. The best I got was late last year on that $9 million total amount that was spent on rental assistance. Gina was finally able to procure for us a parceling of bins as to how many people were in the landlord bin that collected up to $10,000, up to, I don't know, $100,000, up to 250 and maybe up to 350. And I got the population numbers in those bins, but that's the closest I can get. The highest bin, we had 13 people, if I recall, or 13 entities entered in. 13 landlords got in the excess of 250.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah, I mean, we could look it up and give me a little bit of a latitude. We just don't have good controls on how we spend your money.
Okay, so there's the simple theory we have is put sunlight on it or give it light. Okay, now if I was in charge of $6 million and going to cap, I would have a form that says, this is how I want a report to be made on this money. And it identifies where it's going and everything else. And you know, it's very interesting in our community and other places, when you attach specific projects, specific names, how sunlight really clears up a lot of that issue.
So Jenna, have I ever asked you for that?
We've talked about numerous different datas.
Aren't you in charge of it for us? Give them a specification.
Well, the pushback I've gotten on that one was that it was not it was not legal to put that into contract. The same way we got $21 million in ARPA money. I had desired and explored what would that mean to give it back to the property taxpayers. I was told you can't do that. Specifically, you were prescribed from using that to return tax funds.
All along in the formation of our country, the can't do's always found ways to do. So we've got to continue to find ways to do rather than can't do.
Agreed.
Unintended consequences. We just had a report from Judge Hayes here a couple of weeks ago wanting additional Superior Court. The system is constipated with evictions, eviction process. That's part of unintended consequences from our eviction prevention role. Again, eviction prevention. That was, you mentioned it. It was supposed to be a COVID thing. Now it's going on and on and on. Once it gets in, we can't kill it for some reason or another. Okay. So we have to do some things. Landlords are suffering. Good landlords. We're hurting the good landlords. Okay. So again, sunlight and light gets to some of this and saying, what's the problem here? And, you know, public will has ways of kind of mitigating some of these issues, unintended consequences. The second part.
On that one, if I may, Chairman, you're correct. The courts do get clogged up, but let's not fall into the trap that's been offered, which says that can only be resolved if we take on a sixth Superior Court judge. We have
I'm not saying
four
that
court
at all.
commissioners. So I'm just saying the means to handle the situation already is there. So the red herrings that you've seen and the nasty grams I've received over denying a sixth Superior Court judge is irrelevant. I just don't want that to be misunderstood.
Don't get misunderstood. We supported you in not
Yeah.
engaging that sixth judge because it wasn't a solution. The problem hasn't been resolved.
Agreed.
So anyway, and so mitigation, we talk about mitigation. I have landlords that have mitigated and there's no accountability because a tenant tells them to go fly a kite. Still in there, still getting court services from us. Bad tenants have wrecked the system for the good tenants, but we can't handle the bad tenants. Okay, And then an example of CAP and permanent housing. 2-year contracts that CAP is signing with people, putting them into apartments, paying for the deposit, paying for a high portion of the rent, securing the landlord saying, we will cover any damages and the messes that they make. 2-year contracts, the rate they're paying is probably 150% of what would be the market rate. So we have a real industry going here that needs some sunlight.
And I'll just clarify too, that the 2-year contract with CAP that's just our contract with CAP. They're not entering in 2-year agreements with landlords. Those happen on an individual basis that may be month to month or maybe a 1-year lease, but it's not necessarily connected to the this assistance.
On the discussion about the eviction prevention funding, I guess I'm wondering how that works. The contracts, whether it's through CAP or whatever, we're basically paying the rent directly to the landlord. Is it the full rent? Whatever their rent is, they automatically get the full payment.
The previous programs operated that way, yes, with
It was not full necessarily, it was partial also, right?
it could have been partial, yes.
Yeah, in
It kind
fact,
of depended on the
I
situation.
remember the number because one of the numbers I did get from you that on average, the rental assistance was $863 per month.
Correct.
So I believe you mentioned that in order to qualify, a person for 90+ days unable to work then goes into the system to be able to get the rent paid because it's a temporary situation.
Correct. So it's a state program through DSHS. So that's where the eligibility is determined for the HEN program. So they have to be incapacitated from gainful employment for a period of 90 days or more. And that happens through different assessments and talking with the person's primary care doctor and that type of thing. The state does all of that piece and makes that determination. And then through their case management meetings, work with them on what's your next step. Are you recovering and will be able to get back into the workforce? Or is this a long-term disability that will prevent you from working for a longer period of time? And so they're going through that process. And while that process is happening, the housing assistance may be an option to help keep people housed or get people housed.
Okay, so in this case, that's a disability situation we're talking about. Is there an end date to that or is that determined by the doctor?
It's determined by DSHS in collaboration with the doctor.
So they're getting some type of rent relief through that program, as well as, are they still collecting unemployment, et cetera?
I'm not sure. I can't speak to that.
Okay. One other question is for, I believe you referenced for the mediation program, I missed the amount, administration fees. What's the administration fees basically for CAP for this, out of this 6 million, or excuse me, out of the 3,000,007?
Yeah, so the funding streams have a different allowable administration fee. So the eviction prevention one is a little bit higher. I think that one is 10 or 15%, but the HEN funding is 7%. So that one's a little bit lower.
Okay.
And I will add, we never bill the full admin. It's budgeted that way to the maximum allowable admin. And we never end up billing the full admin.
Building it for CAP or building it for the county? What are you referencing?
Both. So there's an allowable amount, but we typically come in under what is allowed. It's based on actual costs. So it's not just a blanket amount that gets transferred. It's based on actual costs. So the actual cost ends up coming in under what is allowable.
Is there a deadline on how long the eviction prevention funding can go on for an individual?
It is temporary. I will have to, let me look it up. Can I get back to you on that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you.
We're gonna get through this, but I've checked with the chairman of the Board of Health, and Board of Health meeting may be starting a little bit late because this is running longer, but I'd like to get through this business.
Now, my experience, and I agreed with you on that sixth judge, Commissioner Mortens and Commissioner Dahl, because I've been through it in the Cowlitz County Superior Courts. Newly elected Superior Court judge, probably the most intelligent on the bench now. And I thought, oh, great, I'm going to get an actual judge. And he sidebarred me to a commissioner who knew nothing about my case. So you are correct. It is a trap, and it's a very expensive trap if you're paying the legal fees.
Okay. More comments on this contract. We're getting comments on all three of these, so I don't know when we, yeah.
Okay, I'll make mine short. Taxation is theft.
Hi, Gina. I just have one short question. And it kind of follows Ron's questions as well. We have the benefits going to the landlord for the tenant. However, some tenants are a whole lot better than others. Do we have any monitors to find out, or can the tenant or the landowner call you and say, okay, this tenant is abusive, and have him evicted at that point in time, or do they have to wait months? Because that would really hurt the landowner.
Yeah, so part of this program allows CAP to do case management and stay in contact with the landlord and help to teach the tenant to be a good tenant.
Okay,
Example.
thank you.
So making sure they have those interactions. The landlord can call and say, hey, I'm having this trouble with this tenant. Can you help? And they will step in and try to help.
Okay, so let's say that this tenant is quite abusive to his situation, and he's does terrible things to his place, and you can withhold money at that point in time, and then they can evict immediately. Is that going to take months?
No, a landlord, this assistance, doesn't prevent a landlord at all from moving forward with eviction if there's grounds.
And
to
how
do
long does that take?
It's same process. This assistance doesn't, delay that process. So I know it is a long process.
Okay, well, that's where I think where Ron was saying that it almost pays you not to be a landlord. I'm sorry.
Any other questions, comments on item 7? We've kind of chatted all three. I don't know what the pleasure of the board is, but we'd entertain a motion for at least item 7.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the contract with the Washington State Department of Commerce as presented by staff.
Any other questions on the contract? Seeing none, I don't. Quick check for hands. No, I would call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Also vote aye. Passes. Thank you. Now 7 and 8, well, they're different, aren't they? Because 7's kind of, once you take that, then so much has to go to CAP, but there's parts of CAP that are RFP.
Correct.
Or am
So-
I wrong there?
No, there's the 7 and 8 are pass-through contracts. They are a little bit different. Lower Columbia
Okay.
CAP is primarily the HEN funding. There was that small amount of what's called HEN Bridge that I mentioned that sort of happens with HEN program, and a little bit of flex funds, as well as a portion of the eviction prevention funding for rent that would be working with the mediation center with those individuals. So it's sort of a tie to then the contract with the Community Mediation Center that in that contract is eviction prevention operations funding, operations and admin to continue their work with the voluntary mediation program between tenants and landlords. And if through that process, they discover that through the mediation, it may be beneficial for the rent assistance, then they'll work directly with CAP for that particular piece of it. So they're sort of connected, but different.
Okay.
So Gina, I think I heard you mention that this program will pay for the point in time count. Right?
The Consolidated Homeless Grant, some of that funding, yes, can support and has in the past our time and efforts to do that point in time count and
So
other
that point in time
responsibilities.
count has ranged somewhere between 250 and 310, depending on the year. If I remember the numbers right, it happens just once a year, and then that's kind of sets the count.
It happens just once a year. The point in time count is not connected to funding amounts. I get that question a lot. But the state uses those point in time numbers to report to HUD. It's part of their required reporting to report those numbers.
So you also mentioned that previously I think you said the HMIS system identified 490 recipients of HEN assistance, which includes housing and the other essential services. How do those numbers compare? Does that, the point in count time, is that included in the 490? Do all those folks qualify for HEN, or is that a totally different number?
Yeah, that's a good question. The point in time count counts individuals who are in the homeless management information system and active in a housing program. So the Department of Commerce pulls that data for the point in time count from projects that are using the homeless management information system. So if the individual were in that project, they would be counted as part of that. And now I have to think really hard about what projects it pulls from, because if the project's considered permanent housing, then they are only counted if they are still looking for housing.
So Community House on Broadway, they serve around 600 people a year,
So
typically on
emergency
their annual
shelter,
comments.
yeah,
Are they counted in the point in time?
yes. So
Okay.
they use HMIS, and all of the individuals in the emergency shelter are counted on that particular day. So it doesn't look at over time. It doesn't look at the number of people over the course of a year. It only looks at one day, that point in time of how many people are staying in the shelter.
And then I would then assume that those in the Hope Village pallet homes, they're counted in the point in time, because those are not permanent homes either.
Correct. They are counted in the point in time count. They're actually counted as unsheltered individuals in our point in time count.
Then the other effort on that day is to find out all the others who are living somewhere in the community. We don't necessarily know. Long Beach Police is trying to keep them moving and keep them from congregating as best they can, at least off of the publicly owned properties. But that's a interesting. So I keep coming back to the 490 in terms of the data we need to know if we're making any headway in resolving homelessness, unless the program is not designed to end homelessness. And that's an important, we'd like it to, because we're spending a lot of money. I think if you divide the 6.3 among 490, it's $14,000 a year of assistance of one kind or another. The numbers never seem to go down. Now, is that because our society has very expensive housing and people can't afford the housing? Until you solve that, we can't eliminate homelessness? Or is it a problem of untreated disabilities or mental illness that keep people unable to maintain housing.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a really good question and discussion. I steer away from using the terms eliminate or end homelessness. And, we used to use that term in our local plan and we shifted away from that because I don't think we will end homelessness. I think we will always see individuals entering into homelessness in our community. And we're not the only, resource in the community. There's a lot of partners that are, trying to help in this situation. So, I can't look at this contract and say we're using this to end homelessness because it's one piece of a much larger puzzle in our community.
Thank you.
Gina, I just had a couple of,
Make sure the
oh, sure.
bright green light is on.
Yep, bright green light. is
Okay,
on.
there
can
you
hear
go.
me okay?
Thank you.
Okay,
Mhm.
cool. Gina, just one, I guess I have a couple of maybe logistical questions, but first I want to comment or I guess ask you about the effectiveness of the program. I know the numbers for Clark County. Do we have a sense within Cowlitz County of how many individuals and families are at risk of becoming homeless, but not currently engaging in programs?
I don't. We can try to look at some of our coordinated entry data. I know we typically see about 1,000 to 1,200 individuals per year connect with our coordinated entry system. So we could look at that and kind of make some assumptions
Mhm.
that individuals are at risk. The majority of the individuals actually that connect with our coordinated entry system here are already homeless. And so we could try to look a little bit more closely at that. But I will just say I don't have access to good data on that particular piece.
Yeah. So just on the statement you had made about the numbers not seeming to change, right? At least in Clark County prior to the pandemic in 2020, there were about 14,000 families and individuals who were at risk of becoming homeless, but not yet engaging in homeless services, right? The Vancouver Housing Authority focuses quite a lot on them. And so I wonder, because another number that you shared, you said 78 days to become housed, 60% have exited to permanent housing, not necessarily totally absent assistance, but have transitioned out of needing like full-time assistance, right?
Mhm.
That's a pretty successful transitional program, is it not? I mean, national programs are effective, but I don't know that they put up numbers like 60% transition back into permanent housing.
It's been hard the last couple of years with the vacancy rates and all of that thing, and we'd like to see that a little bit higher. But that's where we're at today. And I think, factoring in all of the things our community has been through the last couple of years, I do
Mhm.
think it's a decent rate.
Cool. Awesome. So just a couple of questions just to make sure I understand the funding for motions 8 and 9. So motion 7 was for 6.3 million, 260-ish of which is coming from document filing fees. Does that mean 6.1 or so is coming from the state as like grant funding?
Some of it is other local doc fees coming back, and the majority of it is state funding.
Okay, cool. And then for 8 and 9, both of those explicitly state this phrase: funding for this contract is state funding passed through from the Washington State Department of Commerce Consolidated Homeless Grant. So are the numbers, the 3.7 million and the 127,000 in motions 8 and 9, are those a subset of the 6.3 million coming from the Consolidated Housing Grant? Or are those separate funding sources?
No, it's not separate funding sources, and we may have used that term as a blanket state funding. What we collect locally in doc recording fees, we give back to the state. At that point, it's state funding, and they, decide how to allocate it. And so I think that's all that means in that language is it's money coming from the state.
Okay.
That's being allocated.
So does that mean there's a total of about, I think it would be just a little over 10 million in total funding coming from the Consolidated Housing Grant?
No, the Consolidated Homeless Grant is a total of a little over 6.3 million. And then items 7 and 8 that are the pass-through contracts is a portion of that 6.3 being passed down to providers.
Okay, that's what I thought initially. So that 3.7 and that 127,000, those are coming out of that 6.3.
Correct. Yes.
Gotcha. Okay,
Yes.
cool.
Sorry about that.
No, that's all right. Yeah, those are all my questions. Thank you.
Answer your question, Commissioner Weber. You were wondering, is it a matter of cost of housing? Well, let me tell you, 40 years ago, I worked at District 2 with EMT. And he got on at Seattle 40 years ago. He made lieutenant. And when he was just a rookie firefighter, he couldn't afford to live in the city limits of Seattle 40 years ago. He retired as a lieutenant, and now he can't afford to live in the Puget Sound, period. So it is a big factor. And there's screwy things happening here in Cowlitz County with people selling houses and the realtors. They're having a bidding war between people. Now, I don't know if that's illegal, but it's happening because I attended a funeral of a fellow firefighter and I was listening to her children describe they were in a bidding war and they lost the bid. So they're on the edge, as your personnel just pointed out, of becoming homeless.
Gina, I have one last little question on. You said about 60% of the folks in transition off. Did I understand that correctly?
Of those who exited, 60% exited into what's considered a permanent housing
Right,
destination.
Right. And that, I would imagine that would be a success measure, those who transition into permanent housing. And that's right around 300 people, which is close to our point in time count. So there's some measure of success that we can look at from that aspect. As you know, and it is difficult because if the disability is preventing you from earning a wage, does that disability go away? Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. So I mean, it's difficult to say how long do you wait until they get that transition, if they ever transition.
Yeah.
Very complicated.
If I could
make
caution on that, yeah, there's a fundamental problem with disabled individuals. Let me ignore that for a moment. We typically call success or call things successful, but we don't really have a complete picture of defining what success is. We should take into account recidivism. Have they become fully employed? Are they still collecting subsidies and all that? And I don't know how to do that definition, but I certainly don't want people to think just because I went through temporary housing and moved out, that doesn't mean it's costing the taxpayers any fewer dollars.
Yeah, yeah. One thing we also look at is who's exited that we see come back into the system. And we only have the homeless management information system to utilize for that. And so it's not perfect, but we'd look at that piece as well. I think we saw just under 10% that came back from this particular program, which is pretty typical.
And I think you mentioned something pretty critical that we've noticed as long as I've been studying the issue. Right around 1,000, 1,100 people lose their homes for one reason or another each year. A lot of them get their problems resolved and they get back into permanent housing. But yeah, if you look at the folks who provide services to the homeless, you read their annual reports, and there's about a half a dozen of them, can add up because they all tell you, here's how many unduplicated clients we've helped. And it's right around that 1,000 every year. But it's very dynamic. It's not all the same people. You know, it's very, very fluid, which again makes it difficult to track and to measure.
If through this program, CAP signs a agreement for 2 years to get somebody into a house for 2 years, is that considered permanent? Do they get counted as permanent in that 60%?
If someone, so it doesn't necessarily work exactly like that. So our contract with CAP is for 2 years, but the individuals in the program, they're not necessarily signing a lease for 2 years. It's individual. And so it could be if they get someone, if they help to get someone into a unit, it could be that they're on a month-to-month lease. It could be that they're on a 1-year lease. It just depends on that arrangement between the landlord and the tenant.
Well, what I want to know is at what point when that person gets moved into an apartment, whether it's a month to month or an annual lease, at what point is it suddenly that person is counted as successfully moved into permanent housing? Because if he's in there for 2 months and all of a sudden he's back on for assistance, it wasn't permanent, not in my mind.
Right. And right. So that kind of comes into play when we look at the exits from the program. So people don't necessarily exit when they become housed. If they're continued to be eligible through the state, they'll stay on the program, and CAP will work with them to make sure they're good tenants. If they need to be engaging in different types of services or looking for employment or ways to earn income, CAP can help them with that. When they do exit, whenever that point is, and it could be for a number of reasons. It could be because they've stabilized and they don't need assistance anymore, and they exit and they continue to rent the unit on their own. That's the best possible outcome. And that would be considered an exit to permanent housing. It could be that they, their disability is going to be long-term and they are able to get on with a longer term support and they transition to that. That would also be considered an exit to a permanent destination. So it really just depends on the situation, and it's not the same for everybody, and they exit the program at different times for a lot of different reasons.
So if they move from this county to Lewis County,
Mhm.
they exit this county and all of a sudden they drop off the rolls, is that a successful transition?
It depends on where they went. So if they move to Lewis County and they're renting a unit on their own, that would be considered a positive exit.
So
If
you track
they-
them no matter where they move in the country, you're tracking them to find out
No.
if they're permanent housing?
No, but if we're able to collect that when they exit, then that's what gets factored in. If we aren't able and the person just, disappears and we lose complete contact, then we're not able to collect that data, and then we just don't know what happened to them.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions, comments on item 8? Seeing none, I would entertain your wishes.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the contract with Lower Columbia CAP to assist people who are homeless to obtain and maintain housing stability,
Okay,
as has been discussed and will be discussed, I guess.
yeah, thank you. We have a motion. Not seeing anybody approach, no hands. I would call for a vote. Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I also vote aye, but I also strongly, and I feel like I know Gina well enough that she'll continue to ask for information, but I think the accountability is huge. And the three of us continue to push for that. And I know her department does too. Okay, thank you for that. On 9, Mediation Center.
So item 9 with the Community Mediation Center is the second pass-through contract. It is a 2-year contract for a little over $127,000. And this funding it's for operations with a small amount of admin to support their work to continue with the voluntary mediation process. where a tenant and a landlord may be having a dispute, and they can voluntarily enter into this project to help mediate what's going on between the landlord and the tenant and go through this process. I know we've heard from them a couple different times about their program and what they're doing. So this is allowable with the eviction prevention funding to assist with that program.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the contract with the Community Mediation Center as outlined by staff.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor.
Mr.
Questions,
Chairman?
comments?
Yeah.
So again, I'm all in favor of mediation and coming to a resolution, but I also am aware of some of the mediation processes. And the tenant basically at that time has said, stick it. I have nothing to lose and I'm not paying any attention. I don't know what the remedy is and if there's any follow-up.
If I could comment, this is a relatively new program here, and like we all know, the same ground rules can make programs successful or unsuccessful depending on who's involved and the mores and all that. This particular group, I think, is one I'm somewhat fond of, and I think we actually need and should encourage this, what amounts to for us now more or less a stepping outside the box, which was the previous motion essentially. So I was going to ask my colleague if he'd allow me to make the motion, but he spoke too quickly.
So maybe you could make the motion that gives the mediators a little bit more iron in the fire to be able to hold these tenants responsible for going through the mediation process and what's the results?
Yeah, I think I totally agree with you, but I think most people have been following this for a while, know that we've been trying to get that kind of accountability going, and it just is slow slogging. Yeah.
Any other questions, comments on that? Seeing none, I don't see any hands. I would call for a vote. Those in favor,
Aye.
Aye.
also vote aye. Dina, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Unless there's objections from my colleagues, I will recess this meeting for the Board of Health, and then we will pick up again when the Board of Health meeting convenes.
5 minutes.
Yes. So it'll take us about 5 minutes to get Board of Health set up, and I promise everybody, we'll get the public comments. We'll get there. It's just a little bit longer today. So we'll get Board of Health set up and proceed with that. Okay.
At the same time.
Thank you all for coming. This is the Board of Health meeting starting now. We're a little bit late. Sorry about that. First item on our agenda is we have a new member who's joining the board, Alyssa Fine, and we're going to have Commissioner Dahl give her the oath of office.
I need my glasses. You're young enough. You don't.
I hope.
So I would just say, raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, Alyssa Fine,
I, Alyssa Fine,
do solemnly affirm that I will support the Constitution of the United States
do solemnly affirm that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution and laws of the state of Washington,
and the constitutions and laws of the state of Washington,
and that I will faithfully and impartially
and that I will faithfully and impartially
perform and discharge the duties
perform and discharge the duties
of the office of Cowlitz County Board of Health member representing the Cowlitz Indian tribe
of the office of the Cowlitz County Board of Health member representing the Cowlitz Indian tribe,
according to the law,
according to the law,
to the best of my ability.
to the best of my ability.
Congratulations.
Thank you for that and welcome aboard. Next, we're gonna move on to the review the minutes. The minutes have been sent out. Did everybody get a copy of the minutes? I'd entertain a motion to accept the minutes. Somebody wants to?
I'll move to accept the minutes.
Motion on the floor to accept the minutes from the past meeting. All in favor?
So,
Oh,
so before we move, I just had a question. Were the minutes available online with the rest of the business?
It was emailed to all the board members.
Okay, but so the public didn't have an opportunity to look at it.
No, they are put online after they are approved.
I think previously they've been published after they're approved. Did you have a conflict with one of them, something in the minutes?
No.
So, any further questions about the past minutes? So motion on the floor to accept the minutes. I'll call for a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, and I, so unanimously we pass. Next item is the opioid settlement lawsuit. Just, we've talked a lot about it, for the last several months. I just wanted to bring it up to see if anybody had further comments on that. My only comment that I was thinking is that this is money coming into the county, and that money might be able to be used for to replace the mental health tax. Instead of taxing the people, use the money, remove the tax and use this money that's coming in. I think that could be something that we could look at. Well, we'll just move on because that's horse has been beaten quite a bit. But
Just a comment on that. I think the opioid funding is going to sum up annually about 350,000 or so. And the tax revenue has been substantially higher than that.
I don't know if we've started, I think we started seeing some requests on that. I hate to, you were up here long enough, Gina, but when you look through the document, there's quite a few pages of how you could spend that. So it's.
Has the payment structure on it.
Oh, great.
Oh,
Thank
perfect.
you.
See what
Okay.
Nice.
Thank you.
So this is
Yeah.
what's expected over the next basically 18 years.
This is the cumulative between the two programs?
Between what two programs?
There's two settlements.
Oh, this is just the first settlement. I have not seen any information on the second.
The information I saw at the Board of Health training was that the second settlement is actually 4 times this amount.
Yeah, so this is what you see in front of you is the payment schedule for the first settlement. So there may be additional, coming. The top section shows what we've received so far, so about 400,000. And then each year, there's an allocation up to 2038 for the settlement dollars.
So if I may, Mr. Chairman, I'm a little lost. If I recall correctly, the first settlement and the second settlement were going to span about the same number of years and the same amount of dollars, same number of dollars. Is that not true?
I'm not sure. I'll double check.
Because I'm surprised when the chairman says 4 times. That's nothing at all that I recall being that like that.
Yeah, and I know the state puts out announcements about the settlement but the state also keeps a portion of the settlement dollars, so I can look into.
And what we're seeing here is the net to us.
Correct.
Okay.
And then this settlement is with the drug companies,
Correct.
and the second one is with the distributors.
This one was with 3 different distributors.
Oh, this is the distributors. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. So then, like I said, I think there's other settlements as well going on.
I found some notes here. There's a Purdue bankruptcy settlement. That's one's called, and the other is called the Malincrot bankruptcy settlement. So which one was this one for?
There was 3 different distributors in this one. I don't have the names in front of me, but I don't recognize the ones you just mentioned.
He was mentioning manufacturers.
Manufacturers. Okay, so this one is 3 different distributors. I could find it and send that out. I was just looking at it.
Yeah.
so-
I think it was just more, I was just wondering I know there's 2 different lawsuits and wondering
Yeah.
what side this was on. And I'm of the same understanding as Commissioner Mortensen, that they were both about equal. At least that's the way it was. It sounds like that could be different, but that was my initial understanding.
This one says 25 million paid over 9 years. And the other bigger one is 208 million paid over 15 years.
To Cowlitz County.
No, that's to the state. So
Where-
they're divided by the counties
Where are you getting that information?
from the
Kelly?
Washington State Healthcare Authority from
Okay.
the training that we went to.
Oh, okay, great.
So
I'd like this to go up on the screen. Is there any way we could put that up there?
I don't think we have it in the system.
Maybe not.
No, I sent
If you
a,
want, I can go up and hold it up.
We are working on a landing page on our website, and we'll post this up there as well as
Okay.
the
Yeah.
updates.
Oh, good. Okay, thanks.
and I'll resend this. It was just 3 slides that I took from that presentation. I'll just send that out.
Yep. And if anyone's interested, I have a couple copies with me. I think I just brought 2 though. It's about 17 pages long of the allowable uses. It is all focused on treatment and prevention for substance use disorders. So if anyone's interested in that full allowable uses, and we could certainly talk more about what the Board of Health's role is with opioid use, and if there's strategies that we want to explore.
I'd like that.
Thank you very much, Gina. So just kind of blending into the same thing as the mental health tax. Is there further discussion on that?
Gina, do you have the numbers handy for the behavioral health tax?
Yes, but I left them back here. Just one second.
Okay.
Yeah, we tend to keep them to the end, but go ahead if it's a short. Yeah. And we're just kind of, no, we're not doing any action on these, just kind of discussing them. There, if it's on my old business agenda, it stays there until I can cross it off, so.
Commissioner, you're asking about the revenue.
Revenue and what's unspent.
So I do have another similar handout I can pass out that shows, let's see. We're estimating about 2.5 million in revenue this year and about 4 million with ending fund balance, and I'll hand these out.
That's the ending fund balance if we were to end the year right now.
At the end of the year.
So we're still drawing stuff out there.
Thank you.
So an item to notice then is for this year, you anticipate we will be drawing beyond what the income is.
Yes. So, and what you see is what was approved in budget for 2023 with the mental health sales tax funding. And as you know, the Board of County Commissioners are well aware, we're in the middle of our budget process for the next 2 years. And one of the upcoming workshops that the commissioners will have is will solely be on mental health sales tax funding and what departments are requesting and reviewing those requests and so forth. So that will be coming, I think, in October with the commissioners.
Although if people are interested, we've met several times and those meetings are all on the website.
Correct. All of the departments have come and shared information with the board about their sales tax funding and what they use it for. Those are all recorded meetings that you can look back and watch if you're interested.
And I think you guys sent some videos, kind of the highlights cut down to the.
Where it starts.
Yeah, where it
Yeah.
starts.
Yep. I think all the departments now have met with the board, and then the budget workshop is kind of the next thing that's coming up to look at.
And I can add in this chart that you don't see, but for the gentleman who was asking for the admin charges, HHS charges 2% for handling all this.
And I think that's high, actually, with our actuals. I do have a few extra copies of the documents up here if anyone's interested.
So again, I didn't have any action plans. It's just on the agenda, I guess, until we're ready to take some action.
Good information. Thank you, Kelly.
Which Ma'am, was your comment on the mental health tax? Please go ahead if you'd like to.
My name is Carla Gibson, and I would ask that the commissioners please reconsider reconsider their decision to end the mental health tax. The tax provides for 2 of the 3 mental health officers who are trained to interact with high-need inmates of jail. They are a necessary part of the jail's minimum staffing levels. And losing these specially trained officers would require the jail to hire additional staff, likely without the same de-escalation training. Prior to the addition of these mental health officers, the Cowlitz County Jail was sued after 4 inmate deaths in 2013, 2014, and 2016, which is very costly. Since the mental health officers were added.
Can you push the button on your microphone? There.
Like that, can you hear me? Could you not hear me before?
We could hear you,
Not
but the
to hear you.
recording one.
Oh, okay. Prior to the addition of the mental health officers, the Cowlitz County Jail was sued after 4 inmate deaths in 2013, 2014, and 2016. This is very costly to the taxpayers and the county. Since mental health officers were added, the department was not sued even after a death of an inmate in 2022. So these officers being present protects the jail from potentially very costly settlements that could end up in the millions. One thing that I hope perhaps we have finally learned from the opioid epidemic is that drug addiction is a medical illness, not a moral weakness. It requires medical treatment. Most patients with substance abuse diagnoses are also dually diagnosed with comorbid mental health problems such as anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorder. These are serious biologically based illnesses that require interventions by well-trained specialists for patients to improve. When dually diagnosed patients receive a qualified mental health treatment or medical treatment their chance of recovery is dramatically increased. This is the kind of evidence-based treatment that drug court provides. It has been proposed that volunteers might provide these interventions instead of qualified mental health and medical providers. These kind of patients who are dually diagnosed typically present with complex combinations of diagnoses. Prior to their stabilization, many patients can be emotionally labile, agitated, and volatile. It can require more than one highly trained professional to safely de-escalate a frightened or angry individual. Expecting volunteers, even those who have some preparation and training to manage unstable clients, will expose them to significant and very foreseeable risks. In the likely event that at some point such a volunteer were to be injured or killed, the county and therefore taxpayers would incur substantial costs in litigation following that. Finally, even if the mental health tax is discontinued, Cowlitz County taxpayers will continue to pay for the costs of untreated substance dependency and mental health treatment or mental illnesses. In fact, we will pay and pay and pay and pay. We will pay for emergency overdose treatment. We will pay for increased law enforcement needs. We will pay for the increased number of hospitalizations due to infections from dirty and contaminated needles. We will pay for involuntary hospitalizations when people cannot get mental health treatment. The difference will be that all these costs will be incurred by taxpayers in an endless cycle of rinse and repeat recidivism, instead of the evidence-based treatment offered through drug court that provides patients with the support and skills training and treatment that they need to end this cycle. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Carla Gibson. I'm not sure if I said that.
Thank
Carla
you.
Gibson.
Thank you for your comments.
Thank you.
Very good.
Please.
If I could make a statement, at the very beginning, there has been no formal decision from this board or the other board on the tax. In fact, we are doing the right thing by bringing it up early so that people have plenty of chance to comment, discuss it and all that kind of stuff. And that's what's going on here. And I know, I'm sure the board appreciates all that input.
Good morning, commissioners and board members. My name is Jim Hill, resident of the city of Kelso, 1100 North 22nd Avenue. Appreciate your time this morning. Commissioners, you saw an article that appeared today in today's daily news. I circulated. The article is specifically about a fentanyl bust that occurred in Lewis County. The product was transported through Cowlitz County. 5,000 fentanyl pills, large number of Xanax as well. Well-organized distribution system up there. That 5,000 fentanyl pills is a drop in the bucket, quite frankly. Here in Kelso, a year or so ago, we had a drug bust that occurred at our local train station, in which individuals transporting the product from Fresno, California, brought many thousands of pills up here. I don't have a lot of expertise. You commissioners know that my expertise is based on 2 years of service on the Western District Federal Grand Jury in Seattle. For 2 years, I can't tell you now how many cases I listened to that were drug related, but I want to tell you, I thought I understood the level of the problem and the sophistication of the marketing as well as manufacturing system. But once I got a look behind the curtain, it piqued my interest to the level that I have approached you before and talked about specific things, especially the availability of Narcan on our streets being provided. And my chief concern in coming here today is not folks that are over 20 years of age. I'm not sure if there's a program out there that is going to successfully turn those people around. I want to stick to people under 18. That's my concern, because those are the folks that are going to produce the profits for the cartels in the coming future. And believe me, they're being marketed to in a very, very organized manner. The expertise that I have on this subject comes from HIS, DEA, FBI, the folks that are involved with the drug programs prevention. None of them are, of course, are deterrent experts, but they promote trying to deter things. I can tell you that I firmly believe, and for 50 years, I've heard about the drugs, the war on drugs, and I don't see that we've succeeded, quite frankly. Mental issue, biological issue doesn't matter to me at this point. What matters to me is the youth. And so looking into possible things that could be done to deter kids in the programs that exist on our high schools, all of our alphabet agencies out there, whether they're NGOs or whatever they are, if they want to know the dimension of the problem with 18 and under, they don't have a set of data that has been collected in one place they can go to and say, 100 kids went into the legal system, drug related. They don't have that baseline information of kids going into the judicial system because of drug use. And my biggest concern is the use of opioids and the growth of that in these folks, these young kids. What I'm here today is propose that this county needs to develop a system. However, I don't know what agency, I don't know the mechanism, but we need to know at what level we're seeing usage among 18 and younger. How many go into the legal system? And we also need to have some indication of increases in programs that work to try to deter those numbers. You look at the only statistics that we have available, they're statewide and national, and the increase in the last 2 years is dramatic. And let me tell you, these people that manufacture these synthetic opioids, all of these drugs, they source the most sophisticated equipment worldwide. Their production capacity hasn't even been reached yet. And they really, it's just incredible. The level of sophistication, both in manufacture, distribution, procuring the precursor chemicals. Half of Asia has illegal, what we consider to be illegal precursor chemicals being imported. And guess what? They're not only manufacturing outside of our borders, there are small operations within the states that can produce an enormous amount of these products. We may not be able to save a lot of people 20 and older. I think we need to talk about younger, and I think we need to develop some baseline data to find out what programs work and what we can do. Because folks, we got a whole bunch of kids that are going to be on these products. We can't stop that. We can save some. Thank you.
Mr. Hill, I agree with you. And I will do my best to try to work on this. One of my goals. Okay.
This board has talked about the targeting children and prevention, and haven't gotten to any plan yet, but we've talked about it and
Feels like there's some roadblocks. I'm not sure why in the educational area. So we need to work on that.
We have some wonderful on-campus programs. Epic in Longview, Highlander Hope, Care in Castle Rock. Kids know a lot about the drug world. And, you know, sometimes we adults don't listen. Maybe
I've joined the CARE Coalition up in Castle Rock, and I'm going to be attending those meetings.
in October, Vancouver.
No, in
Oh,
Castle Rock. I live in Castle Rock. I'm going to be involved in that, and I feel very strongly about it, drug prevention in children. Okay.
And by the way, drug court, when that issue is finally resolved, I hope everybody understands it has worked. We need it.
You mentioned that, I just lost my train of thought.
I have those moments too, Mr. Mortensen.
You had said something. I just want to remind people, we've been staying inside the box for a very long time, and the results of being inside the box don't work evidently. It's not a question of philosophy, it's a question of the data and the observation. Our focus on the youth should be exactly as you say. So we're at least I'm totally in agreement with you there. The fundamental problem we have is that crime does pay. And in this case, I'm talking about the manufacture, importation, distribution of illicit drugs. And I know it's a very hard pill to swallow and very few people understand, but that prohibition doesn't work. Spending time with kids as in a family is your best solution so far. But going back to the money, I spoke to a retired DEA agent, and DEA agent explained to me everybody along the chain is making bank off of the war on drugs. The cartels, the local people in the local areas, the cartels, the local administration there in the production areas, the all the entire agencies. We've got our own hands in the till. Many, many people involved, and they all make money off of that. So when I asked the agent, that's what she explained to me. And she said, the war on drugs will never end because there's too much profitability in that. The death in the article, you mentioned that something like we have to think about how we can make the people responsible. Like say if I distributed to you fentanyl and you died, I should be put up for a capital crime. I know it doesn't fit with the normal premeditated kind of thing, but you start making people be accountable for the damage they do and things will change.
The evidence that was presented to us indicated a couple of things. First of all, in order to stop existing users of chemical enhancements, you'd have to put a police officer next to him 24 hours a day for the rest of his life. It's that simple. That's a scary thought, but you know, we've thrown money at this for I don't know how long. And one of the things that I'm fully convinced of is that we used to blame folks, other countries and cartels and things for drug use. And you know, it's a personal thing with the users that make the decisions to utilize these things. But when it comes to kids, they can be influenced and they can be manipulated. And I don't care how many times an adult tells a child, don't take that fentanyl pill. If the other side is giving them a message, a very sophisticated message, and they are of susceptibility, their personality is such, or even the sense of hopelessness, which is a big driving force behind kids are getting on drugs, quite frankly. But if that message is delivered, and it is being delivered in such a sophisticated manner, those kids are going to make wrong decisions because it's just the nature of folks that don't have the life experience and have gained the life experience that would make them make a different decision, so to speak.
The only comment I'd have on that is that when we're young, we're indestructible, and we always think that can't happen here. I can try it once, I can have one beer, I can have the drink and everything will be fine. And sometimes it's true, but sometimes it's not. People are going to experiment and try things. I think the best we can do is make sure that we don't have an out of control black market where people engage in something of which they have no idea what's in it. We saw that during Prohibition with bootleg booze that was messed up and people died as a consequence. Didn't work then. I don't see how it'll work here today either, how we're doing it.
Well, I think Mothers Against Drunk Driving was very effective in how they
Exactly, yeah.
Mothers Against Drunk Driving. I really felt like that made a difference. And I also believe the DUI laws made a difference too, because I quit drinking at taverns worrying about getting picked up. And I'm just a pretty normal person. And so I think there has to be a deterrent of law enforcement plus strong education that scares the kids. I don't care what people say about scaring the kids. They have to see those wrecks. They have to see those addicts on the street going through DTs and detoxing and what it's really like in life. We had a young man at one of our meetings that had seen one of his friends die from fentanyl. And he said, I wish I could go and talk to other kids around the city and counties about what I saw and let them know what it's really like and maybe have some videos that are reality, whether the parents think it's harsh or not, or whether educators think it's harsh. Reality needs to be seen so that people will understand. You can't just tell them. And so Kelly and we really feel very strongly about this, and we want to make a difference, and I hope we can. If anyone wants to get involved, we would certainly love to have you be a part of us, because this is a tough thing. And it needs to be pushed hard now while fentanyl is the happy drug. We're going to have other kinds of drugs too. Thank you.
I will say this, I agree with everything you've said, but it's too bad we adults can't make a trip to a morgue and see the young folks there.
Yeah.
Because they're gonna start dying at the same numbers that adults are.
Yeah.
It's that point. Fentanyl, I mean, these drugs are lethal,
It's terrible.
lethal. And I have no answers beyond the fact that we gotta try,
Education.
and we can't do it. We're not gonna be successful with the older folks, the current users. We gotta find a program that works with those young kids. And we may start by bringing them in and just talking to them. It'd be a wonderful presentation for you folks to hear.
Thank you for your comments. Very appreciate it.
Everything that man just said is true presently. And let me take it back to 1986 when this little rookie firefighter was with District 2. I can tell you a lot of war stories. I even picked up some of my own classmates that were dead. There's a couple of rooms in a certain hotel in Kelso that you'll find some gaps on the second floor. There was a meth cook there. There was a house out in Lexington that blew up in our face because we weren't trained at the time. The first trained drug investigator was one of my father's students. All of my family's in education all over the world except this idiot right here. He decided to become a forestry engineer and firefighter, big deal. I also have a quarter into a master's degree at a certain university in Portland, and my instructors were a criminal psychologist and an MD, a policeman from Oakland before Miranda when they still used rubber hoses, and a lawyer, a member of the bar of the state of Oregon. The criminal psychologist and the police officer all met at the Rand Corporation when they were trying to stem the flow of drugs in Florida after Batista was overthrown by Mr. Castro. And I also looked at the federal court record for the United States District Court for Western Washington on the deaths in the jail up in Tacoma at the old train station. I could only read one transcript because they're voluminous. And that one transcript blew me away. The 4 deaths you had here in Cowlitz County. And it did cost the county a lot of money. Because once you take control of a person, you're responsible for them when you arrest them. It's a really interesting read. I wish I could go back and read the other 3 transcripts because there's some stuff that makes the hair I don't have anymore stand on the back of my neck. I'll end with this. The officer that was first trained as a drug investigator had to go to California. It was one of my dad's students. And what happened to him, maybe some of you know. He got it in the back of his neck, point blank by his own daughter, because she was wigged out. But I have another relative who spent 30 years in Tacoma PD, and I have a classmate who's a FBI agent. Here's the sewer pipe, as they called it. They call that I-5. Starts down here in California, and it's overflowing, just like the gentleman said, goes up to Tacoma, then it goes over to Yakima, and then down through the gorge, it goes back down to California. And it got so bad at our entry point down in Richfield that the transportation officers wanted to be armed because what they were finding in the semis, weapons, drugs, money, white slavery. And I'm sad to report it was US representative at the time, Linda Smith, who discovered that. And the US District Attorney in Tacoma just kind of, it's not happening. Well, let me tell you, the Washington State Transportation Officers, they're armed now for a reason.
Thank you for your comments.
Taxation is theft. Mental health tax is theft. Being ripped off every day and it needs to stop. And if you don't stop it, I'm really gonna out.
Thank you.
My goodness. First and foremost, I want to say education and the principles to educate kids is number one. It's primary. I don't care if you're trying to teach them about drugs, alcohol, spam on their computer, on their phone, ransomware. There's all kinds of people out there finding ways to try and get your money, cheat you out of something, or kill you if that's how we got to get your money. The drug issues are a very real problem. It needs to start at an early age on the education level, and it needs to be taught in the schools. It should be taught in the schools on a daily basis. It's very difficult when you have, in my mind, you have a government that's got an open border policy that's promoting drugs and sex trafficking coming through the border like we don't care.
Yeah.
We got to change our immigration policy. The immigration policy could be changed at any time if you had the will to do it through the Congress. Open borders and the security and sovereignty of this country has got nothing to do with the immigration policy. Those are two different things. Anyway, moving right along. I would like to address some earlier statements that were made specifically. There were some earlier statements made about concerns that doing away with the mental health tax was to do away with some mental health professionals. I don't know. I haven't followed any of that, but I would like to address the fact that whether you have none or you have 100 mental health professionals in this county doesn't guarantee you're not going to get sued. That's a fallacy. People can sue you at any time for any reason. The fact that somebody died in 2022, the statute of limitations isn't even up on that for somebody to file a lawsuit. So that's a misnomer. Needle infections, overdoses, and drug dependencies. My God, look at California. Some of the states that are spending millions and millions of dollars on a daily basis. They've got some of the highest problems there is. You're not going to stop those problems. You can address some of them. And yes, drug court can help some people, but it's not a golden cure. It's not the golden answer. We need to provide those things. But the biggest thing is education. And the biggest part of that education is a family values and the wisdom for the people with, and I hate to say religious, but basically those backgrounds that stand up for in groups in the community and say, we care about each other. We're going to take care of each other. That's where we got to get back to, is to say, yeah, I can give you a hand up, but I will not give you a hand out. You've got to have, the other side of that is those people have to be willing to change. They have to be willing to reach out and take your hand and say, yeah, I want a hand up. Education. It's all education. If we fail in that, we're not going to fix it. We're going to be feeding the problem and dumping money into a rat hole for the rest of eternity. This has been going on forever. It's just worse now because of the new drugs and everything's being manufactured on a daily basis.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Wow.
There has been an awful lot that has been brought up with regard to this mental health tax that apparently is gonna sunset if it's not renewed or what have you. We've heard about deaths in jails, we've heard about education, we've heard about theft from the government as far as taxes, we've heard about just the borders. We've heard about so many different things. And I would definitely encourage all of you to consider those things. What the fundamental assumption that is being made that I can speak to, not as an expert, but as someone who is educated and employed as a behavioral scientist. There is nothing to know as to whether or not something is a positive reinforcer or a negative reinforcer until after the fact. You have to look at what the consequences are. And positive reinforcement or positive and negative in that in the context of reinforcements and how science for the past 150 years has determined what people do and how they act and how you can best intervene with people is not negative as far as, oh, this is a bad or a punishment, or positive as this is a reward. It's just simply literally plus or minus. Does the behavior increase or does the behavior decrease? So all of these things that people have been talking about are things that they are presupposing are going to be positive and negative reinforcers depending on whatever data and sources that they have turned to. However, mental health is not as readily observable and as tangible as physical health. If someone has a broken arm, you can see what it is, you know what the treatment is, and you can apply that. Okay, with mental health, I don't care what person goes to drug court. I don't care what person enters a treatment program or how they do it. There is no mental health intervention that works without the person's agency. They have to choose. You can force them, and maybe that set of circumstances facilitates them hitting rock bottom, but it won't matter, which is why there is recidivism. Now, I do not want this tax to sunset. And I think that those who would speak against that particular point of view or hold opposition to that are speaking more to the fact that they feel that it's a theft or they feel that it's worthless because what it's going towards has not been effective. Conservatives may want to think about the box and liberals may want to think about what's outside the box, but either way, in fact, it has to come into the box. Maybe it changes the box, maybe we preserve the box, doesn't matter. What we want is we want our money to be effective in what we're doing. We, the people, also share a great deal of responsibility in the failure when people choose drugs or other things like that, because on the social level, and again, research bears this out, the stronger a person's social support network is, and the more diverse that is, and the more extensive that is, the more healthy of a lifestyle they lead. So if we're going to continue this tax and we're going to address the concerns of corporations, both legal and illegal being the cartels, because that's exactly what they are. They are a business. They operate just like a business. Their tactics are just a little bit more extreme than can be more extreme than what legal corporations do, because there are things that legal corporations do that are just as abhorrent as what cartels might do. But there could be things where we take this tax and we're calling it a mental health tax, and we're applying it to things that incentivize NPOs, because those would be private organizations. There could be things that businesses themselves might have an interest in. We definitely have a number of private organizations within Cowlitz County that work to the very heart of the social problems that speak to why somebody turns to drugs in the first place. And so it's kind of, in fact, it's kind of there's a whole side of a whole coin that you have to look at. Yes, we come to you and we say, if you're going to tax us, then the absolute baseline expectation that we have of that is it does what you say you're going to do. And our responsibility, at least in this regard, is to own up to the social deficiencies that we have with our families, with our communities, with our churches. And government can partner with that, because in this country, that's exactly how it's supposed to be. The government serves the people by coordinating with the people. So just bear that out. Think about the positive and negative reinforcements, and maybe that's where you start to look at. Do the things that this tax have done, is there evidence to show that what we're putting this money towards actually discourages people? Or do they just simply find ways to avoid punishment? And maybe there's other ways that we can deal with people who pursue that, because that would be what the criminal justice system would be for.
Thank you. If it's brief, keep it brief, please.
It's brief. Going back to just Cowlitz County. Like I said, all my siblings and my parents and grandparents all had postgraduate degrees. My father, who was a vice principal in the Longview School District, vice principal is considered the disciplinarian. So he had to, back then it was alcohol and marijuana. And he partnered with a police officer who later became Cowlitz County Sheriff, Chuck Gill. And they coordinated, but the police chief of Longview at the time thought it was, they denigrated him. They called him the kitty cop. Well, he was trained, my father, by an Army JAG officer, so Officer Gill was really interested. And they stopped a lot of the drinking parties and the marijuana parties. And you're talking about, here's what was put to us. Is it a product of environment, or is it ingrained in the human psyche? And this goes back to prohibition. We tried legislating morality. You know what we got? Organized crime. And the only public official, the FBI director at the time, just held up his hands, and he was co-opted by organized crime. And the only man that ever tried to stop it, he's in Arlington next to his brother, Robert Kennedy Sr. And that includes his brother too.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Becky Morkert. I was going to wait till last, but it seems like this is the topic that's come up now. So I guess I'll go forward now. I'm concerned about the mental health tax too being cut, because if it gets cut, the Cowlitz County Therapeutic Courts will probably be cut and not supported. We have drug court, we have mental health court, we have Hope Court, and we have juvenile court, which is the safe court for the juveniles, and we've addressed those. These courts really do make an important impact on our community. I'm a lifelong resident of Longview. I've been in banking and financial management for 35 years. My husband was a fireman for 35 years. We own a business. And so we've been around a long time. And when Judge Warning started this drug court in 1999, we went, wow, this man really cares about our community. We didn't realize that eventually that we would need that drug court. And we adopted two sons. So my story is going to be kind of personal. We adopted two sons. Our youngest was an excellent student. Yeah, graduated with 397, got a college scholarship to the University of Portland to play golf. And after 2 years, he went to a golf college in California. And when he growing up, no drugs, didn't drink, excellent person, came back from California with a drug habit. And I mean, we were shocked. We didn't know what to do. I mean, we were absolutely devastated. We isolated ourselves. We were ashamed. And we absolutely didn't know how to handle this. I mean, we always raised him right. During the time he was growing up, the drug program, you know, I can't remember where the Longview had a drug program in the schools. DARE, yeah, there you go. DARE was in the schools. I mean, we supported that. And so we thought, oh, we had this handled. We didn't drink, we didn't smoke, we didn't do drugs in our home. So he was never around it. But yes, peer pressure got to him. And when they started using drugs, it's like the drug calls your name. And he couldn't stop. He didn't know what to do. And when he came home, we tried everything to get him off drugs. Finally, he got in trouble. And we had the opportunity to go into drug court. And for 2 years, he spent time with the counselors, going to group sessions and doing everything he was supposed to do. The only thing he didn't do is there's only one thing you have to change to get over your drug use is you change one thing, and that's everything. Persons, places, and things. And he wasn't willing to give up his friendships and the places that he went. So 2 years later, he did not graduate from drug court. And I know you guys like the statistics of how many people graduate and how many people don't. Well, he was one of those ones that did not graduate. But I'm here to tell you guys that drug court works, because a year later, he used all the tools that he was given in drug court and the mental health courts. And he went back to school. He got a CDL license, he's a Class A CDL, and he's been driving semi trucks for the last 5 years. And so he wouldn't have done that if they would not have given him the self-esteem, taught him how to be happy again and have focus and goals. And so for you guys to even consider, you know, dropping that program is just, it just really bothers me. It really hurts my feelings. It really, because this is what we need. We need kids, when they get in trouble, they need to have a way to get out of trouble. And he got his self-worth and his self-esteem back because of that program. Yeah, he didn't graduate, but he looks back at that program, and that's the reason he was successful today, is because of that program. And so I just want you to not always look at the statistics of how many people graduated and how many people went in. I mean, there's a lot of other people. There's a young man that was with him during drug court too. He opted out at the same time. This young man now is a self-employed contractor, and he has a family and has 2 kids. And so there's good things that come out of drug court, whether you graduate or not. And so I just really hope that you guys do not sunset that mental health tax. It's already there. We're already paying it. So why take it away? Use it for effectiveness. I mean, there's going to be times when these younger kids are going to get in trouble, and they're going to need to be going into this safe court. And that's, again, another way. Good people get in trouble. Good people make mistakes, but we have to be able to let them be able to have a way out. So I appreciate your time today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'd just like to point out one thing, that ending the mental health tax does not necessarily mean that drug court is canceled. That's not how, from what I understand, it works.
Well, I'll come right out and say, I don't want to pay the tax, but if it would do some good, it's something that has to be. But the definition of his insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. We need to get police involved in all this. We need to start busting the criminals that are selling the drugs and put such a stiff fine on them or a stiff penalty that they don't want to do that no more. Or they're not out on the street for 20 years. If they're caught selling drugs, 20 years, no problem. If you're a student caught selling drugs, 20 years, no problem. Those are the kind of things we have to do to stop this. I was born and raised in Southern California. And I had an uncle that was a narcotics officer on the LAPD. He was a lieutenant. When I was in junior high school, he took me down to the funny farm because back then LSD was very popular and there were a lot of nutty people after they took LSD. He took me through the funny farm and showed me all these people that had been taking drugs. I'm not a goody two shoes. I'm a loudmouth. Sometimes I'm an asshole and a lot of other things involved. But I've never taken an illegal drug in my life. I do not drink. I don't follow sports and terrify my wife with them. But I was addicted to morphine because of a back injury. That's what got me retired. The doctor put me on morphine for 3 years. I took myself off of it because I realized it was becoming an issue and a problem. Even though I could walk, it wasn't the solution. And I don't know the answer to any of it, except make the penalties so stiff that they don't want to do it. And so you got to get the police involved. This tax, if you just keep going around, no, 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 they're going to keep doing it. Make it hurt. Get the police involved. That's the only issue that I've got with it. I don't mind, I don't want to pay it, but if you'll do some good, I will.
Thank you. So I'd like to, is this on the same issue? Please. In the interest of time, we'd try, please keep it brief.
Well, I will try, but I have a lot of notes. It's a personal, mine is also personal. My name is Sharon Harmon and I live in Longview. I've lived here all my life. I was born here. And I am just want to talk about the same issue. But mine is a personal story telling you about my life with a drug addict and how drug court helped. And my life was a living hell for many, many years with my son. And he was raised in a Christian supportive home. My son had been in addiction for about 20 years. I had no idea that he was using drugs till he got fired from his job at Alpenrose. Even though he was asking me for money all the time, I knew nothing about drugs. And I just thought he was having hard times, making his rent, paying his car payment. After that, but then I found out after why he got fired. And after that, it was continuous hounding me for money. I ended up spending $100,000 of my retirement on him, thinking that I could help him. Anytime he'd ask me to do anything, help, I'd take him places. Let's get out of town. Let's do this. Let's go somewhere. Let's, and he said, okay, maybe that'll help. And all the time I know he knew that that wasn't going to help. So I joined a support group called Nar-Anon. And because I had no idea how to handle this. And then they would tell me what to do, what not to do. But I couldn't. I just could not. I could not do it. I loved him and I didn't want him to quit loving me. So while growing up, my son was a very funny boy and he always kept me laughing. And when he became a drug addict, he was not that way. But he went in and out of many drug programs. He was in jail for a whole year one time, and finally, he did so many things that he was gonna go to prison. And so it was drug court or prison. And he did not want to go to prison. So he did do drug court. And many of my Narnon friends, me, I never gave up hope, but we didn't think he'd do it because he was such an addict. I saw him overdose many times. But he did. And he'll tell you to this day, drug court did it. Drug court is the one thing that turned him around. And he is now my funny guy. He is back. He has a job. He has everything he thought he'd never have again. And he is just a wonderful person now. He is a most wonderful person that he has never been in his life. And every day he is better and better. And so what makes somebody change is they have to hit bottom. And his bottom was prison. So I'm just hoping that, and I even have a grandson that needs mental health, but he does live here. And so I just hope this program can keep going because it does help. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, I'll be brief. For me, I think the question is not with the mental health sales tax, do we like one program or do we not like it? The question is, do we have a need for mental health services in our community? And the answer is yes. We have substance use disorder problems. We have people experiencing mental health crises. We need increased access to treatment. We need increased access to prevention. The behavioral health tax is 1 penny on $10 that local citizens spend. To me, that is a great way for the community to be co-creators in solving the problems of this lack of access to treatment and this lack of access to preventative services. So the question is, do we want to continue to use this tool we have in our toolkit to provide programs that can give increased access to treatment? Yes, we need those tools. Please look at the mental health sales tax not as, do you like the programs or do you like taxation? But look at it as a question of, do we want to continue to work together in our county to solve the problems of a lack of access to treatment and a lack of access to prevention? Please keep the behavioral health tax. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Teresa Purcell and I am a citizen of Longview. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. I just wanted to take a few minutes. I actually didn't come to speak about the mental health tax, but I'm going to right now because I am right now dealing with a mental health crisis in my own home. And when we talk about mental health and we talk about drugs and we talk about all of these issues, I just want to make sure that we're clear that when we talk about the mental health tax, your comment was, well, we'll find the money somewhere else. Well, we haven't, where will we find the money? That's something that is to be very, very clear. And I want to support Mr. O'Neill's comments about the fact that this isn't about the programs. Let's figure out what programs will work. But right now, the system is failing everyone. And when we talk about children, we have to look so much further upstream. We have so many parents who don't have the tools that they need to parent effectively. We have grandparents raising children. We have, when you can't decouple mental health and substance use. You can't decouple the lack of opportunity and hope with mental health and substance use issues. The issues that we have are so, you have to look so much further upstream if we really want to help build, if we want to get out of this so we're not just dumping tax dollars down the hole. I am a huge advocate for the efficient and effective use of tax dollars. But just saying no and not having any solutions just ends up, we have more people in the emergency room, we have more people in jail, we have more people in the morgue, and we have more people in crisis in our community, potentially doing harm. So I beg you and I'm happy to help in whatever ways I can, but to understand that we have to go further upstream. We have to make smart investments, and those investments, we know the drug court works. We know there are programs that are working, and there's programs all over the country that are working that we could look at to model. We need to come together and say, how do we use these buckets of money? Because there's also additional resources to come to bear to make the smartest investments for our community, and to understand that it costs us all more if we don't make those smart investments. We don't use the tax dollars that are available, and we also don't work together. That just makes the system work. That just makes the system fail, and we're failing our children, we're failing our citizens, and we're failing our community if we don't look at how intersectional all these things are. Let's focus on how do we actually serve the needs of the community? How do we actually make sure people have access to care? How do we make sure parents have access to the tools that they need to support their children so they're not driven into the despair that is a byproduct that drives people to use? And the connection between mental health and substance use is irrefutable. So I encourage you all to please maintain the tax, but also let's work together to be creative about how we make sure that we're putting in place all of the systems necessary to have the citizenry of Cowlitz County thrive. So we're not stuck in this race to the bottom. And I appreciate your time. And I also just wanted to mention there were a couple of other things on the agenda today that I would encourage you to table. The medical freedom resolution, I would encourage you to table for another time, or to just vote against. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate your work, and I appreciate all that you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I made a presentation to this body about, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago or whatever. I'm a proud member of the Oneida Nation, and I am an addict. My drug is alcohol. Alcohol is an insidious drug because it's so approved. There are many taverns or whatever. I'm friends with Judge Basher. Judge Basher told me of a time when he was by the lake and one of his drug court people said, "Judge, I've been here one day. I've been clean one day, and tomorrow's another day." I beseech you all to look at the problems we have. I talked earlier about the problems, about the various drugs and whatever. I just want you to know that I'm for the extension of the tax. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'd like to close out that segment. And we'll carry that over to another meeting because there's still lots to discuss on it. Please.
Excuse me, Chairman, just a quick thing on the timeline. Gina, the tax expires in March of 24, right?
Correct.
And how much lead time is needed, if any, for continuation?
I believe we need to submit something to the state in December. I'm not sure exactly if there's a specific day, but I think by December, we would need a decision to submit the documentation to continue.
And how much lead time do we need if we do not renew the tax and then choose immediately thereafter to bring the tax back? How much lead time does that need?
I don't know the answer to that. If you discontinue it, but then
Right.
bring it back, not renew it.
Yeah, let's say we let it expire in March and in June, we say, oh my God, that was a horrible mistake, or, something like that. We
Yeah.
decide to bring it back.
I'm not sure. I know historically it's been renewed. It's been
It's-
scheduled to sunset the end of March, and then when it renews, it starts collecting in April. So I'm not sure if that's tied to something with the state. That's just historically what it's been on. So I'm not sure if it would start sort of mid-year, for example, if you chose to do that.
All right, thank you.
With, thank you on that. And I just like to just voice for some of my constituents is the tax, they're being taxed to death is what they're telling me. These are some of the old guys that are on fixed incomes and they're getting ready to go on to food stamps. So there's a strong argument from them to get rid of the tax. And like I said before, removing the tax does not necessarily mean there's drug court is not is removed.
Mr. Chairman, we have one of our board members on Zoom that has her hand up.
Can I go, excuse me, can I go ahead?
Yep, go ahead, Mary Jane.
Can you hear me? So I have two questions. Number one, does the decision of the mental health tax come before the Board of Health? So will we be making a recommendation or a decision that moves to the county commissioners? That's my first point. And my second point is, I think I'd like to go ahead and pull the STDs agenda item off the agenda because it appears that we are well over the time allotted us for a Board of Health meeting. And I recognize these are important issues, but I want to be respectful of the people who took time away from their work, who took time out of their day to show up to talk about some of these issues. So those are my two comments.
Thank you. Yes,
And questions.
yes, the board will recommend something when we're ready to take a vote on it, and that will be pushed to the commissioners.
Thank you.
That answers your first question. So yeah, we are moving on. We started a little late. We're running a little late. So I would say I'm gonna take off the table the medical freedom resolution for another date. And then if I'm gonna leave it up to HHS if you would like to present your presentation or not, up to you. I've been told it's 15 minutes.
This is Mary Jane again. I recommend, we've already kept these people here almost 2 hours. I would recommend that we table it for another meeting. And again, in light of being respectful of the people who showed up.
Well, the doctor just stepped up and would like to do it.
Okay, I'm in then. Thank you.
I will do whatever you tell me to do.
Thank you very much, Dr. Krager. Sorry to hold it off so long, but we do have a presentation on STDs that was actually requested by our board members.
Gonna say good morning, but it's almost afternoon. So my name is Dr. Steve Krager. I'm the Deputy Health Officer for Cowlitz County. We were asked to provide some slides around sexually transmitted infections, also known as STDs or STIs. So we've provided some of this data before, so I might be able to move through it fairly quickly if it's okay with you. But I'm happy to answer questions as well. So thanks for having me. Let's go to the next slide. Just a couple notes. First of all, I just want to thank Shannon Hoskins, our contracted epidemiologist, for putting these slides together and gathering this data. A couple things. This does not cover all STIs. I'm going to cover kind of the bulk of our work is what I will say, which is chlamydia, gonorrhea, and syphilis. Obviously, there are other STIs, but most of our work revolves around that. So that's what I'm going to focus on. But if you have questions about other STIs, I'm happy to talk about that as well. So we're going to just look at kind of like what our data looks like in Cowlitz County as well as across the state. Talk briefly about how these are transmitted and some long-term health effects that can happen. Look at yearly counts kind of over time and then compare with the state. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, this is our overall burden of what is reported to us. So these are reported by healthcare providers and labs. Chlamydia makes up the bulk of our cases, so about 3/4. And then gonorrhea and syphilis are kind of the next biggest ones. Other is mostly herpes, so HSV 1 and 2. HIV is not on this list. I will note it's kind of the way its funding works and who does that work is mostly done by the State Department of Health. So that's not covered here as well, but we can talk about that data if you want to. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so chlamydia. This is our most common STI that we have in Cowlitz County, and that's true nationally, at least in terms of things that we work on. Spreads through sexual contact. It can transmit to newborns during delivery. If you've ever had a baby and they put some antibiotic cream on their eyes, that's part of the reason, because it can lead to blindness. Chlamydia is interesting. A lot of infections are asymptomatic, so without symptoms. This is why we recommend people who are sexually active get screened on a regular basis for chlamydia and gonorrhea, because a lot of times it can be an asymptomatic infection. So some studies, it kind of depends on what you look at, but 10% of men, 5 to 30% of women actually end up developing symptoms. So the majority of people do not. You'll have discharge at the site of infection. It can infect various parts of the body. Pelvic inflammatory disease is kind of a term, a more severe type of infection, I will say, in women that can lead to chronic inflammation, which can damage the uterus and fallopian tubes, leading to infertility. That's one of our biggest kind of long-term things we're trying to prevent when we prevent chlamydia transmission, as well as treating chlamydia is trying to prevent those long-term outcomes like infertility. Let's go to the next slide. So we're going to look at data for each one. Maybe. There we go. Okay, so big picture. Chlamydia in Cowlitz County has decreased over the last couple of years. Let's go to the next slide. We'll kind of look at that. So these are just raw numbers. So you can kind of see our counts. We're in the hundreds. We peaked around 2019, 516. And we've kind of gone down since then. We initially thought, a lot of the decrease in 2020 in STIs was perhaps due to people not accessing care, but we're seeing a little bit of a trend continue that way. So it's a little bit hard to analyze. Let's go to the next slide and we'll look at the kind of the graph over time. So this, the red line is Cowlitz County, the gray line is the state. So we match fairly closely, I will say, in terms of our rate when we look at it per capita, like per 100,000 people. But right now we're about 15% lower, which overall is good news. I'm still a little bit concerned about kind of an overall trend if we look at like the last decade that we're still moving that direction. It's hard to say. We'll see what the next couple of years look like. Hopefully we'll continue a downward trend and kind of reverse some of what we've been seeing the last decade, 15 years or so. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So great, yeah. So we did have, a significant increase kind of over the 2010 to 2019, both in Cowlitz County and even greater increase across the state. Let's go to the next slide. We've been seeing a trend downwards since 2019. I will note one concern I have about this is access to healthcare. I think that is true for lots of parts of the state, but I do worry specifically about Cowlitz, and maybe we're just missing people, honestly.
Dr. Krager,
Yeah.
excuse me. Didn't you start working for us about 2019?
That's exactly when I started working for us. Thank you, Commissioner Weber. I'm not going to take credit for that, but I appreciate you bringing that up. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So right now, as kind of the title says, we're about 10 to 15% lower than the state in terms of our rate when we compare numbers. All right, let's go to the next slide. Okay, gonorrhea. Also spreads through sexual contact, can also spread to a newborn during delivery and lead to kind of significant infections, especially in babies that are born early. The data on this is not as clear, but more also a large number of asymptomatic infections. But man, when I looked at the research, it was between 10 and 80%, kind of depending on what population you're looking at. So I didn't put any numbers up there. Similarly to chlamydia, you often have discharge and pain at the site of infection. Can also lead to pelvic inflammatory disease, can also lead to infertility in women and also in men, although it's much more rare in men. Gonorrhea can infect your entire body, especially if you have a lowered immune system. That's called disseminated gonococcal infection. It's rare, but can be fatal if untreated, especially. All right, let's go to our numbers. Yes.
A question, please. You mentioned the asymptomatic. What's the prognosis for an untreated?
Yeah, that's a great question. It kind of depends on a lot of factors, but in some people, it will kind of lead to some chronic inflammation. Again, especially in women, that can lead to infertility. Some people will clear it on their own. But
by that, you mean your body will eventually perform?
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and I would say that's different than, say, syphilis, which we'll talk about a little bit, which very rarely clears on its own and often leads to very chronic long-term issues. Yeah, it's a great question. Okay, gonorrhea. I feel like I'm already taking up more time than I wanted, but we will, similar kind of data. Let's actually go to the next slide too. There we go. I like looking at the graphs. We had an outbreak in 2006 of gonorrhea, which is that green spike, where we had a lot of cases, more than usual. And then we have this kind of similar trend where throughout the 2010s, a general increase in gonorrhea. And then we've had this divergence, divergence from the state, I will say, since 2019. Actually, it's kind of started in, 2019, where we started seeing a decrease in Cowlitz County. The state has remained more flat. So right now we have 50% lower numbers than the state. Again, I will kind of, I will state, I do worry that we're missing some numbers, but overall, I'm not going to complain about lower rates of gonorrhea. Let's look at the next couple slides just to highlight a couple things. So yeah, a large increase kind of in that decade, both in Cowlitz County and across the state of gonorrhea. And let's go to the next slide. We've flattened in the state, and we've seen about 40 to 50% decrease since 2018 in Cowlitz County. Okay, let's see.
A quick question on that.
Yeah.
It's really dramatic that the growth factor was 6 or so. Was there any external event that ties into that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I will say that trend mirrors statewide, as the last kind of graph showed, it mirrors statewide trends, but also national. And I've done some reading about why, and no one has a clear answer. There seems to be, more risky sexual behavior happening, leading to more transmission. These are rates, so it's not completely explained just by population growth. So yeah, I don't have a great answer. There wasn't like some sort of clear event that led to that. Okay, this is the last disease I'm going to talk about. One thing I didn't talk about in this slide, I'm focusing on kind of public health data, but all of these are treatable. through antibiotics. And, we strongly encourage people to be screened if it's appropriate for them. Syphilis, slightly different transmission. It's really mostly just infectious during the first phase. There's kind of different stages of syphilis. Someone has a syphilitic sore called a chancre, and that's how it's transmitted by contact with that. Also can be transmitted not just during delivery, but actually we're more worried about syphilis during pregnancy. This is called congenital syphilis. And unfortunately, we have seen a rise in that across the state. And we've seen a couple cases in Cowlitz County over the last few years, but not a huge increase. So symptoms in terms of syphilis depend on the stage of infection. Starts out with a painless sore, and then develops a skin rash, fever, swollen lymph nodes. It can essentially infect pretty much any other part of the body. But what we're most concerned about with people with kind of advanced syphilis is it can lead to blindness if you have ocular syphilis, so syphilis in your eyes. You can also have it in the brain, leading to a wide variety of kind of neurologic symptoms, and can also lead to permanent damage. This is, if you hear about like people throughout history who may have, people think may have had syphilis, sometimes that's what gets talked about as kind of their late stage symptoms before, we had effective treatment. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, let's do a couple. Perfect. So lower numbers overall, which is great. Although, again, I will note kind of a significant rise, kind of the late last decade through 2018. Let's go to the graph in the next slide. Thank you. So prior to 2017, we kind of it was kind of hard. We had such low numbers. It was hard to calculate a rate. But the blue line is Cowlitz County. The gray line is Washington State. We are, again, kind of divergent from the state, although the numbers are low, and it's gonna be a little bit noisy because of that. So in the past, we had higher rates than the state. We're currently lower. And we'll, again, kind of see what happens. This is, unfortunately, you kind of see that. Thank you for putting that up there. You see that spike across the state in 2020 and 2021. That is continuing into 2022 and 2023, where we're seeing just quite a bit of syphilis transmission, as well as congenital syphilis across the state, which is a concern. Okay, let's see.
A question on that?
Yeah.
At some point, it may be my ignorance about the health officer, but in HHS in general, when I see a number going from 4 to 14, and we were already in small numbers there.
Yeah.
I would have guessed that the medical profession would be involved in, say, tracking and talking and so forth. Did we get swamped? Is that what I'm seeing here? Because 4 people
14.
isn't really that significant, I think. I mean, it is to them, of course, but I'm just talking about numbers.
Yeah, and from 4 to 2018 is 4 to 55, and yeah. So when we see these things, so part of our work, our nurses at the department, it is contact tracing is a piece of that work, which is calling people, trying to get a hold of them, trying to understand who they may have had contact with and who they may have transmitted to, and then making sure that they get effective treatment as well to try to prevent further transmission. I think to your question, if we see something concerning, and I will say we've put out regional alerts around syphilis. I want to say both in 2021 and 2022, because we were seeing kind of regional rates rise, where we do try to kind of gather our resources in terms of healthcare providers, make sure that they're screening people appropriately, and just kind of being on the lookout. Syphilis, especially is one, not a lot of providers have a ton of experience. I mean, even if you look at our numbers, while they're significant, not every provider in the county is going to see a syphilis case this year. So we try to kind of keep that in people's minds so that they're, they're aware, screening the appropriate people and treating as appropriate. Does that answer your question?
Yeah,
Okay.
in the same vein, when we go from 55 down to 21 in a couple of years, that also makes me ask a lot of questions. What you're thinking there?
Yeah, again, I think it's harder for me to talk about 2019 because I'm a little bit unsure. To me, the people not accessing healthcare during 2021 and 2020 makes some sense. Syphilis, especially, if you if you don't go kind of while you have symptoms, it can remain dormant for a long time. So I do wonder if, there's a number of kind of asymptomatic syphilis cases that we're missing. Otherwise, I don't have a great answer. We continued to kind of do our work around it. But I don't have a big change that happened in 2019 that I can explain.
On something like syphilis, which is very dangerous,
Sure.
Are you contagious if you're asymptomatic?
Usually not. Most of with syphilis, sometimes you can have very subtle symptoms that people may or may not notice, and they may be infectious at that point. But the vast majority of transmission occurs when people are symptomatic and like clearly symptomatic. Yeah. Although I will note, you're most infectious. I talked about this. You have it's called a syphilitic sore or a chancre. That is completely painless, and some people may not notice that they have it.
And so as a process, if I'm an sexually active young person, not to besmirch the young person, but is that something where as a policy you would recommend get yourself checked out at what intervals?
Yeah, and it kind of depends on your age, and we didn't get into like demographics, but it is true their rates are higher in younger people kind of across the board in terms of STIs. So younger people, if you go for a regular checkup with your doctor, these sort of tests should be recommended. And the other piece that comes into that is kind of your sexual activity, right? So if you have multiple partners, kind of over a shorter period of time, you'll be recommended to be screened more often. So that's part of that kind of provider patient, communication is talking about those sort of things and figuring out what's most appropriate for you.
And often means 3 months, 6 months, a year.
Yeah, I could pull up the guidelines. I don't know them off the top of my head. For most people, it's once a year, but some people it's recommended more often. Okay. I think, thank you. Let's go to the next slide. These are great questions. Okay, so I've mentioned congenital syphilis. Across the state, we've seen a dramatic increase. Cowlitz County, and this is true of like most, a lot of kind of public health things that have small numbers. It's hard to talk about. We've had fewer than 10 is what I can say kind of with confidence. We had 0 cases from 2002 to 2017, and then we've had some cases since then. So again, a problem. It's not huge numbers that we're seeing in Cowlitz County, but honestly, I'd prefer to go back to where we weren't seeing any cases at all. And this is also true across Washington state. Okay, let's go. My computer died, so that's it. All right. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any other questions.
Thank you, Dr. Krager, for your presentation. One comment. I read a study that said that syphilis, of those, let me ask first question, the gonorrhea, the chlamydia, and the syphilis, is it only the syphilis that attacks the brain?
That's a good question. Gonorrhea can lead to kind of like body-wide infection that could infect the brain, but that's pretty rare. And syphilis is more known, again, if you kind of let it progress to attack the brain, yes.
And what I read was that the highest rate of syphilis is in Washington DC.
I don't know that off the top of my head, but yeah, that may be true.
That's a different kind of syphilis.
That's what I read. It was meta. So thank you very much.
Yeah.
Anybody else have any question for the doctor?
Yeah, if I know I'm contagious with any of these diseases and I do not change my habits, what does the law prescribe for?
Not
for that?
much. Yeah. You know, I think in the past, there had been laws specifically around HIV, and even those have changed recently. I'd have to double check, but I want to say they've changed in 2019 or 2020, changing penalties for, and it kind of depends on, how you describe it, intention, right? If you're trying to, actively infect other people, versus being careless, right? So I would let lawyers kind of speak to that. But in terms of these infections, I'm not aware of any kind of laws that, talk about consequences if you're, not being careful.
In the absence of HIV, should I infer anything from that?
I'm not sure what you mean.
Is HIV not a problem at all? We don't even
Oh.
think about it anymore?
No, it's definitely a problem. And while we don't have, gosh, I should have looked at the numbers. We see, I want to say between 10 and 20 kind of new cases of HIV in Cowlitz County a year. So again, not huge numbers, but it is still a problem. And obviously it's a lifelong infection, right? So we're treating people, for a long time. I left it out of this presentation because, again, that is one where our state partners kind of do that contact tracing work. So I focused on the work that Cowlitz does specifically, but it is still an issue, absolutely.
Thank you
This is
again.
Mary Jane, if I might. I wanted to go ahead and thank you guys for going ahead and having this. I think it's important to talk about these kinds of public health issues that are among us and impact people in a lot of negative ways. So I appreciate the presentation.
Thank you, Mary Jane.
So with that, since we ran late, we started late, I'm going to go ahead and close the meeting. So some items will go over to the next meeting when we have that. And thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
You had mentioned holding over till next week the medical freedom resolution. Is it your intent to work with the lawyers to revise it so that it's legal?
I think we always have to work with the lawyers.
I mean, it'll be a different resolution next time, right? Or no?
Yeah, I've seen the emails and the chairman's been working with the lawyers. I think there's still a fair amount of work that needs to be done. I think for something like this, the lawyer's admonition to date has been pretty important. And I think we should strive for something that gives this spirit of medical freedom, but keeps us out of stepping across the line. And I think that means working with the legal team again. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for putting out the first, what I'd call a straw man. And that means we're going to throw darts at you for having put your neck out. But I think this is key enough that we don't want to repeat what has happened to some of the other counties. And but that's just my opinion at the moment.
So for the board's information, we are in the midst of our budget process for all of our departments, including Department of Health and Human Services. We will probably be determining the budget for that department before we meet again, I think. Which means we have another year that this health board hasn't made recommendations on the budget.
I see what you're driving
I
at.
see, yeah, that, I'm sorry to cut it short, but one of my notes is exactly that. You had said some of the things that we have to focus on, and I will, if you could please drop me a line, send me an email of exactly what that is, and let's put that onto the next meeting's agenda. Yeah.
Chairman, I know you're trying to close the meeting up, but I think there are several people here that came to speak to the proposed medical freedom issue, and if it's something you're going to be considering, and there's time available, I think there are a number of people here who would be interested in speaking to that and getting more input, more help looking at that.
Yeah, it hasn't been officially proposed, but if somebody else would like to say something about it.
Thank you. I appreciate your interest in hearing from the public.
Always. I
S-
work for the public.
Thank you. So today I do want to address the proposed medical freedom resolution that was published in the agenda. It sounds like maybe there is some behind the scenes discussion going on related to that, and it may change in the future. But I wanted to speak from my experience as a public health professional to my reaction and observations about that, what was at least currently proposed. So when I worked at Cowlitz County Health and Human Services, I did complete extensive emergency management training as a part of working at the health department, which was a great opportunity for me to learn about how the county responds in an emergency. What are the structures put in place so that the county can respond quickly and effectively in the midst of all sorts of emerging information where you might not know what the particular emergency is, and you're trying to make decisions quickly. So there's a whole emergency operation structure that gets put in place when emergencies start. So I had a great opportunity to learn about that. And actually, when I was working at the county, we did a public health exercise where we did a simulation of a public health emergency in our community. And we were able to partner with law enforcement and other people that would activate in an emergency situation. We got firsthand real life experience about as close as you can get to what responding to a public health crisis is like without actually having an emergency in our community. And then the last bit of experience that I'm speaking from today is from working during the COVID-19 pandemic, where I worked for a 7-county accountable community of health that included Cowlitz County. And we had the opportunity to help with part of the response. We developed a program that helped people stay home in quarantine and isolation when they were determined to have a positive COVID test. So our program helped them get deliveries of fresh fruits and vegetables so they could stay home and not have to go to the grocery store. And it provided them with connection to other sorts of assistance if they had a financial impact from needing to stay home in quarantine and isolation. So from all of that experience, I really would urge you not to pass the resolution as it is proposed. It would severely hamper the ability of our local public health system to respond to future emergencies. Contagious diseases and other infectious agents are a key type of emergency where a local public health response is needed. If an event like this were to occur in the future, we want our local public health system to be fully equipped to rapidly respond with all the tools it may need to prevent the loss of life. Quarantine and isolation and strategies like masking and ventilation to control the spread of infectious agents are the tools public health uses to prevent contagion. While people may have concerns about how those tools were used in the recent COVID-19 pandemic, this resolution would apply to future emergencies that are likely to be entirely different. We need our local emergency response to react in a timely manner to the on-the-ground situation with the actual emergency that is occurring. If quarantine and isolation or other measures are needed to stop or slow contagion, there is a strong precedence already established in law for public health to exercise these powers, such as with the controlling the spread of tuberculosis. And a health officer is exactly the type of highly skilled and specialized position needed to exercise how and when such powers are used locally. The public health officer is a key figure in responding to a local public health emergency. Stripping them of power 24 hours after an emergency is declared, unless there is approval from a 7-person board that may not be able to be convened in a true emergency, would be harmful to the emergency response operations of our county. Similarly, requiring everything related to the response to be vetted and approved by the Board of Health would severely hamper the national standard for responding to emergencies using the emergency operations structure. During an emergency, we need to trust and empower our local staff to act responsibly. The emergency operations structure and procedures are proven to be effective, which is why they are used nationally to manage any emergency that occurs. Inserting the Board of Health into the emergency command structure would not work. Another problematic idea in this resolution is that no county assets can be used for something that one day may be deemed unconstitutional. Fiscal management during an emergency cannot operate under a wait and see if we decide this is okay in the future mindset. The county needs to deploy assets rapidly, and the county's emergency management plan has structures for controlling and accounting for those assets. With the mix of state and federal assets that come into a county during an emergency, clawing back Cowlitz County assets that were used inappropriately according to this resolution, if they were deemed to be used inappropriately at some future date, would be an expensive and time-consuming undertaking. If the resolution had been in place during the pandemic, it would likely have delayed or prevented my program and many others from helping people in our county stay home when they were sick with COVID. We worked with the health department to refer people to our program. If they had needed Board of Health approval, I'm not sure the Board of Health would have had time to consider our program with all of the other pandemic-related issues like masking and infection control and all of those other things that were being considered and discussed at the time. In my experience working with Cowlitz County employees and monitoring the overall pandemic response across several counties, I believe the staff in Cowlitz County, the current health officer, and the whole emergency operations command run by the county was very effective at many of the challenges they had to face. I also know there was ample room with the emergency operations structure for the Board of County Commissioners to stay informed of what was happening and to provide their input in leading the pandemic response. And I'm sure in future emergencies, the Board of Health would have a similar opportunity to participate in the response. This resolution would not have helped our county during COVID-19, and it would potentially harm our county in future emergencies by disrupting effective emergency management practices. I urge you all to vote against this resolution. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. I'd just like to say that closing the schools down for 2.5 years and arbitrarily closing some businesses but not others was not what you say is effective from last time we did this. That's just my personal opinion. So with that, any board members have any questions, comments? Okay, we'll adjourn the meeting.
Actually,
yes.
If I could ask the gentleman one question, we did set a Wednesday late day once a month at essentially his request. And we've done that maybe 6 months worth, and I've seen him there only once. Is there an issue? You don't like the material we present, or did we pick the wrong time?
Look, he's asking you a question. We
Yeah, no,
gave you plenty of time. He has no further comment.
Yep, he answered.
Okay. Thank you. We'll adjourn now at 12:25. Thank you very much. Thank you for your patience and your time to be here.
We'll get set back up with the commissioners. We'll bring the BOCC out of recess and opening up the public comments, probably in about 5 minutes.
So Alyssa, take it.
Thank you.
What's your concern, sir?
I take it that those let's say you're a lieutenant commander? Okay. And is that a full structure in the system?
Yes, so we are uniform service, not armed, we are uniform service with the Department of Health and Human Services. So the Surgeon General of the United States is the national service that we all call.
Oh, okay, that's totally new to me.
Yeah, most people don't know we exist, but
Yeah.
we deploy to public health emergencies, and when we're not deployed, we serve at various federal agencies.
And you've been with them for a long time?
Been stationed at 5 to 6 years. I've been active duty with the US Public Health Service for 11.
So you're not necessarily a tribal member?
Maybe not. I was selected by tribal leadership to serve as their representative.
I like the leadership. That's cool.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. No, I wasn't trying to foment.
Oh my gosh, everybody knows. Yeah. It's like, how was your? People. Yeah.
Almost. Yeah. Yep. Okay, we'll bring BOCC out of recess and open it up to public comment. I will mention real quickly, in an hour, our afternoon budget workshop has the jail, offender services, adult probation, expo tourism, sheriff and department emergency management, and office of public defender. coming in an hour. So with that, we'll open it up to public comment.
I guess. I did buy a shirt, so I want to get.
You didn't hear Woody earlier.
I wasn't. I had to go over and I got Gators is under fire now, you might say, no pun intended, but anyway, I'm kind of helping him out a little bit. But that's for tomorrow. But not here. So anyway, mental health tax. How many times do I have to say it? We don't want the mental health tax. I've talked to every person in Longview at this point, and I have found, except for the small people that were here, everybody else is against it.
Hey,
So.
Could you put some numbers on that?
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
sort of.
Well, it's like roughly 30,000 people in Longview. I got to all of them, and then I've been around to a bunch of the county and nobody,
No, so are you saying that you put out a concentrated effort and you talk to probably 300 or 400 people, and out of that sample, you know that the overwhelmingly they're.
Yeah, it's a math thing. I learned it in high school. You just project,
Oh, there's some very rigorous math that says how many people you need to sample to get a good statistic
Yeah.
on that. And so you went around to various neighborhoods and
So you select the sample.
I what?
You selected the sample.
well, the question is not that he selected it, but how he selected it.
Well, he just said he went and picked them.
Well, if you want to know the truth, I prefer West Longview. I've done a little canvassing and it's flat and the houses are all really close to the sidewalk,
Yeah.
Yesterday I went around in town more and the houses are like way back and they got these porches that are like a labyrinth you got to get through to get up to there. And then when you finally get to the door, it says no soliciting. But that's the life of a canvasser. So anyway, back to this mental health tax thing. Man, I'm tired of us trying to solve I'm tired of government trying to get involved in everybody's problems, you know what I mean? And trying to solve everybody's problems because they never do. Government has never solved these issues, and to keep doing it, it's crazy. And to hear all these people blovate about, gosh darn, we got to help this little thing or that little thing. No, we don't. This is America. It's the land of opportunity, not the land of handouts.
So Tim, I can't help but ask you a question about why you're picking on this tax when there are other sales taxes that you never question.
No, I question them all. And
You haven't before us.
well,
Only
that's
been this one.
because this is the one that's at the front right now. And I know it's a small percent of a small percent. And that's why I have hope that we can get rid of a little tax, just a little one goes away. Then we can bring up some of these bigger, more egregious taxes.
One of the other sales taxes that we have is funds the Law and Justice Fund. And it's another tiny percent of
Law,
a
law
percent.
and justice. That's like some kind of oxymoron.
But you've
or
not
something,
mentioned
right?
that, even though that's.
Well, I'll be bringing these other taxes up. In fact, Dennis, because you're so knowledgeable in the tax things, you could just give me a list of them and then I could come up here and read the list each time if you'd like. But like I say, this is the one that's on the front burner right now. And I know it's a small tax, but just think, one less tax.
Well, if I could help you too, the law and justice is really a proper function of the government.
Right.
And so, and that's not free.
That's right. But the fact is that law and justice is something that's paid for, should be, out of my property tax. Now, I know for a fact, it's not like I own my property. The state owns it. And I get to pay them a little bit of rent every month or, annually. I just paid mine yesterday. That law and justice stuff is supposed to come out of that. Also roads. And if you could get roads right and then have this other part work right, then we might talk about some other things. But first things first, you know what I mean? Get government in its place. And I think that this board has come around to doing a pretty good job thanks to listening to me. And if you continue to listen to me, You'll always be right.
Yeah, I've gotten I got to press you a little bit on this, despite the fact that some people don't.
I'm sorry.
No, they're saying you didn't speak to me and I live in West Longview or something like that. So I know you said in tongue in cheek that you talk to everybody in Longview, but you seriously have talked to a lot of people, because I know you're actively on helping people with campaigns, and I know you put signs up and all that, and you can't help but speak to people. Of the people to whom you speak, is there a sense there where you can say exactly, where you can say strongly that in fact an unbiased poll out there would suggest overwhelming desire to eliminate that tax?
Yeah. So in my canvassing, I carry a couple papers with me. And it's a tax setup, and this is the other one's the Longview budget. So it doesn't really matter exactly which tax I'm talking about. Everybody doesn't like it. I don't know another way of saying that. Now, to be fair, there is a very small percentage of people, I can think of 3 offhand that I've spoken to out of the last year that were like, well, everybody should pay their fair share. Although I don't think they have any idea of what the fair share is or what the fair share is going to. You know, it's
Yeah.
We know we've had problems here in the past, you know, and it's like in the county, when I speak into county people, we're doing a good job in county as far as what the roads. Of course, we could free up our sheriff's department a little more to do some more things, have something more of a justice kind of thing. I've talked to lots of people that, you know, call the sheriff or the police and nobody comes. And sometimes, you know, those are personal people. They're different responses to things. You know, if they call up and say, well, my cat's in a tree, well, you know, maybe somebody's not coming. But when people are calling and saying, hey, there's some guy under my car with a saw and he's cutting off a part of my car and nobody shows up, well, no, that's a little different. You know, that's like, or when they do show up and catch them, which they often do, or times, then nothing happens to the perpetrator. You know, and so law and justice, if you want me to fund law and justice, when people are caught breaking the law, when they're committing an actual crime, then there should be law and justice. But do I need to pay an extra tax for them to not do anything?
Well, could I rephrase that by saying you are concerned that your tax money isn't effectively treating what it's supposed to treat? Because I don't know, maybe Mr. Weber knows, is the general fund money and other monies specifically allocated towards one function over another?
General tax revenues are not. There are certain specific taxes that are earmarked for certain activities like the ones we
Like
mentioned today.
the reason the roads in the county are in good shape is because that is we take care of the taxes that go toward that. We don't play any games in that.
Well,
So one of the fundamental differences with cities, though, is out of their property tax and sales tax, they pay for libraries, they pay for fire protection, and the county doesn't do any of those.
yeah.
So, I mean, that's one of the differences.
Well, I'd love to jump into that one because that's the library you mentioned is a really good one. It gets me a lot of doors opened when I show them that what they spend on the library versus the roads. That's over in Longview though. But in the county, and I want to thank you, Dennis, because you know, in coming to these meetings and discovering how you were removing money from the roads, from the tax that we pay for roads and putting it into the general fund, Yeah, every time I talk to somebody and tell them that story, you know, and it's like, yeah, their hair catches on fire. They're mad right away. And it's kind of funny. I was over at Extreme Machines and I was talking to the county guys, the road crew guys that had their display there, and man, sat down, had a real long chat with those guys, at which I think most of the money should go to them personally. That's what we're paying our taxes for. And really, for the amount that goes through, we should be driving on roads paved in gold as far as I'm concerned. You know, and our roads are in good condition, but if you look at what happened out on Tower Road, where they had that washout, and you look at how many millions we got to put in a bridge, you know, if there would have just been a little bit of, they knew about it, it had been reported by those homeowners there, those road crew guys all knew about it beforehand. But somehow, you know, the top guys didn't say, hey, you know what, let's go out and fix that spot right there before it goes worse. You know, and we got the sinkhole also over there on where I can't remember the, you know, out by Castle Rock. So
Pleasant Hill.
Yeah, Pleasant Hill, thank you. And so, you know, there's a couple of spots there that could have been fixed beforehand. I know sometimes your hands are a little bit tied because of the fish thing, but there's a certain amount of this that's kind of ridiculous because the Pleasant Hill one, you know, well, we're going to put a bridge in someday before we, you know, we're not going to replace a culvert because of the fish. But I literally could easily throw a rock to the railroad track right there and there's a culvert. You know, nobody's telling the train what to do, the railroad there, and nobody's going to get on their case about putting a bridge there, and the railroad's not going to do it. And it's kind of like they're doing work up on Ostrander too. And they're saying this opens up a bunch of fish migration and they're putting in a bridge there. Hey, and really these bridges are better than culverts. I mean, I don't really have a problem with that. But the fact is what they're talking about fish habitat up there. First of all, no fish go past the weir. I've spent a lot of time hiking in the area and they got a weir set up down on the lower end and no fish go beyond where that bridge is. The weir is before it. So there's no fish are going to go up there, even though they said 18 miles of fish habitat or something. No fish is ever going to make it to there. They're blocked. They can't get up there. And so, you know, replacing that little spot with a bridge, it's better than a culvert, and it is kind of preventative maintenance. It's kind of an example of what should take place. But this whole thing of fish mitigation, okay, there's a weir, but also the river goes under the freeway there and it goes through culverts. So there's always this little disconnect between what one side says versus what the reality is. And it's the same thing with the mental health tax. There's all kinds of people that make a living off this mental health tax, and it doesn't do any good. I've been here and watched their report and I've done the math on it and it doesn't pan out. And as a taxpayer, I don't feel like I should have to pay for other people's problems. I just don't think I should. And it goes to all these, you know, housing vouchers, boy, all that stuff that Gina had to put out, 60% of 30% of 75%. And it's like, well, you know, you look at government sometimes and they'll come out and they'll say, wow, somehow we've lost $1 billion. And you think, who's the accountant that gets to lose $1 billion and then still keeps his job? You know what I mean?
But what you don't see is the $1 billion is only 0.1% of $1 trillion. So no problem.
Yeah, it's a rounding error is what they call it or something. But man, I don't know. When I was in school and I took math and stuff or test of any kind, I had to be 100% right. You couldn't get a rounding error and pass. So anyway, I know it's getting late for you guys and I know it's lunchtime. So taxation is theft. Don't forget it because I will keep saying it. I'll keep reminding you. Yeah. What else do you call that right there?
Anything else? Seeing none, we will adjourn. We'll be back in 45 minutes.
Maybe.
Don't you have Rotary today?
That's Wednesday.
That's Wednesday.
That's the other one.